This is Atomic Shinobi and today I am going to narrate first part of What If Kid Naruto was manipulated by evil Kurama. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Yuko, the Kyuubi no, was thrilled. He was unable to recall the last time he had enjoyed himself so much. The demon fox swept his tails left and right, bringing down entire groups of trees and buildings as he towered over the village of the leaf. He was slobbering and spilling it over the humans and small ninjas who were running toward him or away from him. As various forms of jutsu raged around his paws, tails, and occasionally torso, scratching his skin and infrequently causing shallow cuts, his frantic red eyes gazed down at them with a mixture of challenge and amusement. Before launching a fierce chakra blast from his mouth at the men and women gathered around him, he let out a deafening roar that was agonizingly loud. He was already persecuting them with rapid bursts of red energy and precise paw movements, and only a handful of the targets were able to avoid the devastating attack. He felt more powerful as more shinobi fell. I had a great time. A huge toad with a pipe suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and he jumped, barely avoiding the knife that was thrust at him from behind. Now, that might be enjoyable. A portion of the forest surrounding Konohagakure was crushed when the Kyuubi fell cleanly to the ground. He turned back to face his new opponent with a broad smile. He thought it was a summon, but the toad was staring up at him with a kimono flapping in the wind and a knife held to the side. Standing atop its head was a man with a resolute look on his face as he spoke to his horse, which suddenly sprang forward. Halfway through, the Kyuubi met them, barely escaping a water bullet that the toad threw at him. He jerked his head and sank his fangs on the knife, wielding arm that was descending upon him, effectively snapping it as the large concentration of chakra exploded somewhere behind him. Only a moment before the summon's other arm pushed him away did the wonderful taste of blood fill his mouth. If the summoner hadn't startled him by doing something to his right foreleg, he wouldn't have let go so easily. Though he cautiously moved a few paces away from his opponents, he was unable to see any weapon in the tiny one's hands, even though it felt like a big, sharp object had pierced him deeply. Though he was secretly impressed by the sheer amount of chakra the ninja had to pour behind it to hurt him, even if only slightly, he gave that some thought before brushing it off as some sort of jutsu, most likely wind-based. He watched the blonde man for a long moment, grinning at the horrified expression on his face as he saw that the wound on his foreleg had already begun to heal. Instead, the enormous knife lay forgotten among the trees, and the toad's right arm remained drooping limp at its side. Its eyes were burning with justifiable rage, but its face was also contorted into a pained expression. It yelled something at the ninja, who appeared momentarily surprised before yelling something back, all the while keeping his gaze fixed on him. The Kyuubi had never bothered to learn human language, so he had no idea what they were saying, but he was sufficiently adept at reading body language to know that they were arguing about something, as was evident from their tone. In any case, he was too thrilled about what had already been one of the greatest fights he had seen in a long time to give much thought. Finding a suitable opponent was difficult given his strength, and it was disheartening to consider that even the most formidable ones could only hope to amuse him for a few minutes. The ninja and the toad were no different. They were about to fall apart. Nevertheless, he was happy to have met them. After all, he had been right to let the odd man with the fancy eyes perform his puppeteer trick on him. In any case, he would quickly locate him to give him a proper thank you for this wonderful occasion. The subsequent assault was twice as vicious and just as quick as the first. With amazing speed, the Kyuubi rushed forward and quickly surrounded his opponents. As his clawed paws slammed right on the toad's chest and three of his powerful tails batted on its head and face, the demon fox shrugged off the summoner's lightning jutsu and ignored the weak punch. Before landing heavily on its back, the massive animal was flung off its feet, sending its pipe flying away with it along with a stream of blood. As the Kyuubi watched in awe, wondering whether the summon would rise again or simply puff away in a cloud of smoke, the ground trembled under its weight in a deep rumble of protest. He must have been thrilled to see it slowly getting back on its feet, stumbling forward as its legs seemed to be about to give out. He was shaking its head as though to wake it from a daze, and it was bleeding profusely from multiple wounds on the chest where his claws had easily pierced it. He had a resigned resolve on his face, and the blonde ninja was still on top of its head, seemingly unharmed. Then both summoner and summon sighed at the same time, and when the former spoke to the latter, all that was heard was a grim nod. Kyuubi waited. He was very interested in finding out what his opponents were trying to create. Given their condition, it had to be a desperate move, and in a fight, desperation frequently results in stupid but dangerous attacks, usually on both sides. He was very interested. With his tails wagging slightly in anticipation, he approached the two slowly and circled them almost languidly, much like a cat would with a mouse. He couldn't help but smile when the ninja began to perform some seals, wondering what kind of jutsu he had in store for him. Subsequently, he sensed a force of energy pushing against him, more like a tug than a pressure. He didn't like it at all. It was like something was tugging at him. But not daring to attack him now, he stepped to the left, away from the man who was undoubtedly the cause of this. Instead, he assumed a defensive stance, his legs bent and poised to pounce at the slightest hint of danger. The only indication of danger he saw came too late, so it turned out that it was unnecessary. It took several blinks for the Kyuubi no Yuko to believe what his eyes were seeing. You did not happen to see that sight every day. Directly behind the ninja who was still on top of the toad was a translucent figure. He was dressed in a flowing white robe, and although the demon fox was unable to see his face, behind a veil of pale hair, a pair of dark eyes threatened to pierce his very soul. His spectral hand was actually reaching all the way to the stunned Biju who was staring at it in horrified horror, and it was literally passing through the man who was still performing seals. The god of death. Holy shit. The Kyuubi was rendered completely helpless. At this point, even employing chakra appeared to be impossible. As the blonde bastard completed the jutsu, all he could do was watch helplessly. The demon fox was aware of it. Too many times before, he had witnessed the outcome. Every other Biju had met the same end, being imprisoned inside a human being until the host passed away. What he had learned then had upset him more than he had imagined, and he had even managed to talk to one of them, the monkey idiot. The Biju within the host died along with him. Death. The Kyuubi struggled with all of his strength to break free from the Shinigami's hold, but it was all in vain. He was up against a deity. Seething inside, he paused and simply fixed his intent gaze on the ethereal figure. He would not perish. Never, ever. He would either outlive his human host or find a way to get away from him. If there was no other option, he would fucking make himself immortal. He would then chuckle in the Shinigami's face. When the ninja suddenly hesitated, he was already anticipating that moment. His grip on the Biju that was connected to him loosened a little as he halted in the middle of a seal and began to speak in between gasping breaths. He restarted after perhaps 2 seconds. The Kyuubi had been nearly too shocked to exploit it. The word, almost, is the key. The demon fox did the first thing that sprang to mind, feeling a mixture of exaltation and panic inside. He let out a howl. It was loud and high, pitched, and the air itself trembled violently around him. Pointed at the night sky, his muzzle emitted a massive load of red chakra, hardly a tenth of his total. The entire horizon was illuminated with a crimson hue as it hovered there for a few seconds before exploding in all directions, sending countless tiny stars hurtling away in a strange rain of sparks. The Kyuubi returned his gaze to the Shinigami and the blonde man who had called it forth, and the triumphant smile on his face revealed a goodly number of pointed, sharp teeth. He was once again immobilized and unable to summon chakra due to the death god's hold, but it made no difference. He had done everything he could. He watched the ninja finish his jutsu until he knew nothing more, and he felt a sense of contented resolution. Impatiently, Amino Iruka yelled, "Naruto," from the top of the Hokage monument. "Haven't you finished yet?" The orange-clad child yelled, "Almost done, Sensei," as he dangled before the carved faces of the strongest ninja in Konoha's history. "Just wait for a minute." Even from directly in front of the Yondaimi's chin, the next sigh was audible. "You said that 3 times already. I thought the incentive of free ramen would have made you clean everything up in an instant. Guess you're not that interested in it, after all." A furious and somewhat alarmed response was given. "Don't you dare go back on your word. You said it would be free ramen, and free ramen will be." The scarred Chunin murmured, okay, and then spoke up once more. "Just hurry up." The boy mumbled something as well, but more out of annoyance than anything else. As his host's hand rubbed and scratched at the green surface before him with unrelenting ferocity, the Kyuubi no Yuko watched in some confusion. As he watched the boy's continued behavior, the initial thrill was already beginning to fade. Now that he was standing so rigidly and listening to his rapid heartbeat like a young girl in front of her crush, he truly felt foolish, but in actuality, Uzumaki Naruto was the more foolish of the two. The boy swore loudly, "Damn it." He paused for a second, breathing heavily, and then he started up again with new energy. After listening to his student's frustration, Amino Iruka asked him, "What is it?" The young child paused once more and glanced up at his sensei. With the rag he was holding shifting from side to side, he complained, "I cleaned up these stupid faces through and through, but it's this damn stain. It just doesn't go away." The ninja asked inquisitively, Really?" And the Kyuubi could easily imagine him picking at the scar on his nose. "Let's see then." After a few seconds, the academy teacher descended the rope and joined Naruto on the tiny platform that was suspended in midair, directly in front of the fourth Hokage's chin. "Now look," began the blonde aspiring ninja. "I dipped this into the bucket full of soap," he explained, holding up his old rag as an example. Then, almost accusingly, he added, "Then I wring it out just like you told me. I rub at the dirty area. And nothing happens. The green stain is still there." For a moment, he appeared almost proud of it, but then he realized that he should have been annoyed. He was irritated, because the green stain was, after all, what was preventing him from getting free ramen. He ought to have been enraged. Iruka began, Naruto, to partially divert his attention from his irate thoughts. "Just what are you talking about?" The boy asked shrewdly. "What are you talking about?" The Chunin asked again, looking perplexed. "There is no stain there." After a few seconds of staring at him, Naruto turned back to face the Yondaime's chin. He frowned as he asked, "What am I talking about? What are you talking about? Can't you see this round, green, thing here?" For 2 or 3 seconds, the man looked closely at what Naruto's finger was pointing at while furrowing his brow in bewilderment. Then he turned back to his troublesome pupil and shook his head. "What kind of prank is this? Do you really believe you can convince me I'm becoming blinded?" The blonde child threw a threatening fist into the air at his words. "Do you really believe you can convince me there is no stain there?" Iruka screamed, "But there is no stain there," and patted the stone as though to support his claim. "Just some kind of circular crack on the stone, probably the doing of a troublemaker like you." Naruto snorted, "Bah! I would never do that. A crack in the Yondaime's chin. What prank would that be? And by the way, what you just touched was green. Green. A vein on the man's forehead began to swell slightly as he spoke the word very slowly, as though addressing a slow child. "Whatever." The ninja waved his hand dismissively. "I think we're finished here. It's already late and tomorrow the genin exam you have to take part in will take place. If you want to come with me, I'm going to Ichiraku now." Then, mumbling something about stupid pranks, he shook his head and began climbing once more toward the summit of the Hokage monument. Happiness ignited in Naruto's eyes. "Yes," he exclaimed, giving the green stain in front of him a single glance. "But if the Hokage scolds me about that broccoli ball on his predecessor's face, I'm telling on you." The irritated yell from above was, "Drop it," and the boy readily obeyed, his mind already full of images of steaming ramen cups. The bizarre scene that had just played in front of the Kyuubi left him with no choice but to shake his head. For the first time, he pondered whether the blonde Hokage who had vanquished him nearly a decade earlier had truly combed through every shinobi realm to locate the most unobservant, thick-headed infant on the planet to serve as his host. For a brief moment, the Biju was unsure of what to do as he observed the boy rearranging everything he owned on the tiny platform, a skip to his step and a satisfied smile on his face. Would he really let this opportunity slip through his fingers? The blonde child had never been this close to one of those before, so it seemed like a huge waste of a chance to simply let him leave as though it didn't matter. It would be so simple, all it would take is one word to finally get things moving. His strategy for liberation. The risks of ruining everything were as great as the temptation. Knowing the boy, he would notify his teacher right away by acting foolishly, such as babbled like a fool, if he got in touch with him now. It was a minor miracle that nothing negative had come out of the argument over the green stain. He surmised that in this case, Naruto's folly and obsession with pulling practical jokes had worked to his benefit. With a weary sigh, he slowly curled inside his cage, his tail swinging uncomfortably for a short time before settling on the damp ground. No, he said. All he needed to do was wait a bit longer. Await a better opportunity. He did nothing but follow his host's lead as the Chunin prepared to raise the little platform. When he noticed the boy's inquisitive gaze lingering on the Yondaime's chin and the enigmatic stain on it, he began to wonder how long he would have to wait. The Kyuubi couldn't suppress a small smile. Perhaps, just possibly, it wouldn't be long. Konohagakure was quiet and still on this cool, humid autumn night. Only a few houses were illuminated by the still awake residents, and there were no people to be seen moving about the village's streets. Given that Konoha is a ninja village, it goes without saying that the majority of activity was occurring in the shadows rather than in the open. And Uzumaki Naruto was now moving in the shadows. He had mastered the art of cunning to avoid being discovered right after one of his pranks, so it came naturally to him. Without really needing to, he moved silently from one shadowy corner to another. After all, he wasn't going to do anything covert, but he had discovered throughout his life that doing things this way was less problematic. He began moving on it as soon as he arrived at his destination. The Hokage monument was a difficult climb, but he was accustomed to it as well. On top of that, he spent enough time to become familiar with every route, and that night he chose the one that would give him both silence and secrecy with ease. Upon reaching the summit, he cautiously lowered its front through the Yondaime's hair before using its nose to finally regain his equilibrium. Its nostrils were the ideal spot for his feet, and he placed them there, breathing heavily due to the exertion and his nervousness. He gasped when he saw how far away the street below appeared to be. After giving his lips a quick lick, he clumsily started down again. It goes without saying that the Kyuubi was ecstatic. Once more, he eagerly observed as the boy found a spot that was sufficiently comfortable on the Yondaime's left and went about securing his position. The demon fox was unable to control the speed at which his tail's wagging. It was just getting started. At last, Naruto raised his blue eyes once more and pointed them inquisitively at the location he was interested in after confirming that he was standing securely on a firm surface and that his feet wouldn't suddenly slip. To his great satisfaction, the green stain remained. He wasn't dreaming back then. It felt a little different from the rest of the mountain, so he brought his left hand to it and gently brushed it with his fingers. In spite of the cold air, it was warm and extremely smooth, not nubby at all. He questioned whether he truly couldn't see it or if Iruka had lied about it. That wasn't exactly right, though. Given that he had mentioned the circular crack that Naruto was currently touching, the scarred Chunin had witnessed it sufficiently. He simply hadn't noticed that the area inside that crack was a deep green rather than the same drab gray as the rest of the Yondaime's face. Perhaps he was truly color blind. Green. Blind. Perhaps that had been some sort of prank, albeit a dubious one. Or perhaps. He muttered, amused at the thought, maybe I'm the only one who can see it's green. After giving it some thought, the Kyuubi made up his mind. He told Naruto, not really, which shocked him greatly. Wah. The boy instantly pulled his hand away, and the abrupt force of his motion nearly caused him to lose his balance and fall. He yelled, the stain talks, and gestured to it. The demon fox rolled his eyes, but for a moment he was tempted to simply accept Naruto's foolish suggestion. Instead, he stated, first, that is not a stain. Second, the stain is not me. Who are you then? The orange-clad child asked, looking around agitatedly. His eyes widened like discs as he looked up at the fourth Hokage's carved face. The Yondaime? No, Naruto. The Biju said, I'm not the Yondaime, and then changed it. Even though he's currently with me, sort of. What? The blonde exclaimed as he glanced around with excitement. Are you the Nidaime? No, the Shodai then? No, you can't possibly be the Sandaime? If only you would allow me to. Oh, I know, you're just a wild spirit, right? Stop talking. The Kyuubi, now frustrated, yelled. The Biju could have acknowledged that the boy was, indeed, a kind of wild spirit when he thankfully shut his mouth, but he wanted to put an end to the guesswork game because it was becoming very annoying. In any case, he had better things to do with his limited time. He rolled his eyes at Naruto's pouting and said gravely, listen carefully, kid, and try not to freak out. I am the Kyuubi no Yuko, and I am incarcerated within you at the moment. Naruto blinked his eyes several times at those words before voicing his thoughts. The demon fox made an attempt at something different. Remember the lesson Iruka taught you about the Yondaime? He inquired. You typically pay attention to the lectures that discuss the Hokage. Still looking up and down to find the source of the voice, Naruto nodded in confusion. The Kyuubi continued in a somber tone. Iruka told you that the Yondaime died after killing the 9 tails, but that wasn't the truth. After being sealed away, the Yondaime passed away. After you've sealed me, him, inside of you. What? Me? The Biju thought, as the blonde's brain was beginning to function normally once more. What are you talking about? I think I would know if a huge fox lived inside my body. He paused at Naruto's inquisitive expression. More like behind your navel, actually, but it doesn't really matter. What? The aspiring ninja reached down and touched his stomach. Are you the one who makes those fluffy little balls? Before realizing the boy hadn't meant it as a joke, the Biju snorted at it. No, I'm not. With great indignation, he responded. Well, complained Naruto, shrugging. That would have explained it. With a frustrated sigh, the demon fox carefully controlled his temper. He listened carefully to his host's expressions in the ensuing silence. He said plainly, you still don't believe me, and the boy scowled. It's not that I don't believe you. No, you're right. I don't believe you. The Kyuubi gave an eye roll. All right, then. You could ask the Hokage. Oji-san knows. A startled Naruto exclaimed. He is aware, of course. Everyone does, he said, trying to sound indifferent as he continued. Why do you think you're hated by everyone? After a few seconds, Naruto's mind eventually developed this new piece of information. It's you, it's your fault, he yelled, gesturing toward the stain once more. I'm not to blame. It's different because of me, the Biju clarified. Intransigently, Naruto went on, it's not different, they hate me because you're living in my navel among my fluffy balls. Demon Fox gave a snort, and who is to blame for that? The boy let his breath out once more, then slammed his mouth shut. Then he scowled up at the carved face of the Yondaime. He yelled, you bastard, and pointed once more. I hate you. In a bland voice, the Kyuubi said, I'll make sure to pass on the message when I see him. However, when I questioned who was at fault, I wasn't talking about him either. Like with me, he is to blame for the entire circumstance, but it is not his fault. Who, then? Was all Naruto said. Even he was growing weary of making wild guesses about all the day's mysteries. The villagers, naturally, the Biju remarked casually. Because I am inside of you, they despise you. How foolish is that? He watched as the boy considered it briefly before going on. They most likely worry that you are me or will become so in the future, but we both know that is untrue. I have a good feeling they are aware of that as well, somewhere deep down. Naruto nodded his head, beginning to show that he was beginning to believe the argument. Then his expression suddenly turned serious. He stated resolutely, it doesn't matter, anyway, and the Kyuubi fell silent at the expression in his eyes. He pushed his thumb against his chest and grinned slightly. I don't care why they hate me and I don't care if it's their fault. Everything will change when I become the best Hokage in Konoha's history. They'll surely acknowledge my strength then, and they won't hate me anymore, believe it. After a moment of staring, the Kyuubi shook his head in laughter. Really, he had suspected it. The Biju had a fairly accurate picture of the boy's personality from 12 years of unrelenting watchfulness, and he was aware that the boy was almost incapable of harboring resentment. He knew Naruto would never have been able to hate the villagers for how they treated him, especially now that the scarred Chunin had given a lecture about the significance and role of the Hokage. Indeed, the demon fox could have subtly influenced him to become resentful or even bitter toward Konoha if he had set his mind to it, but that was the extent of it. Naruto was simply too much of a gullible fool. The Kyuubi, however, had no desire to incite his host against the village. It would not be in his best interests. He needed Naruto to be strong, and it wasn't a good idea to distance him from people who could assist him in that regard. That was already demonstrated by the academy teachers, who, with Amino Iruka's exception, had all but destroyed his ninja training. All he could hope was that the boy would pass the upcoming Genin exam and eventually run into a genuine sensei who would be willing to teach him in person. That was crucial to his strategy. After a long pause, the Kyuubi said, I believe it, and I'll assist you. The boy asked with hope, really? And appeared to be quite pleased. Would you do that? Anyway, I'm bored. Naruto said with less zeal, gee, thanks. What kind of help can you give me, anyway? The Biju gave a disdainful huff. He saw the would-be ninja furrow his brow and fix his intense gaze on the Yondaime's chin, saying, that would bring us back to the stain, as you called it. Get a kunai out. Meanwhile, the Kyuubi couldn't help but smile as the boy whimpered about desecrating the Hokage monument once more as he worked around their goal. For the umpteenth time that day, he thought, finally, and this time, it was the real thing. Try it now. Uzumaki Naruto inhaled deeply and took a step forward as those words echoed in his mind. Before lifting the stone in his fingers, he lowered his face and looked down for a moment. It happened instantly. A green circle of light flashed around him as soon as he extended his right hand, and then thunder roared fiercely in front of him before a lightning strike killed it and sent it crashing to the ground. He looked at the blackened area where the jutsu had just struck, and for several reasons, every hair on his body stood on end. Green grass had caught fire and was idly burning to ashes in a circle around it. Holy shit! Exclaimed Naruto. Yeah, I know, the Kyuubi replied smugly. Do you still believe that I am unable to assist you from within? As far as the Biju was concerned, everything was going rather well. Without even explaining what the attack did, he had led the boy to a remote area of Konoha's forest and encouraged him to try it out. He didn't even know what would have happened, but based on the blonde's enthusiastic response, it was a success. Naruto exclaimed. I'm taking back everything bad I've ever said about you, he said. That was so cool. Wasn't it? The boy's eyes were wide as he gazed at the stone in his hands and said, just. What is this thing? It was a perfectly round sphere, big enough to fit precisely in his tiny palm, and it was smooth, so smooth, in fact, that it made him think of the velvet cloth he had once stolen from that upscale shop by the Hokage Tower. Its normally green color was now speckled with tiny, electrical, blue bolts that slithered about beneath its surface, and it was somewhat warm, especially now that it had somehow unleashed its amazing power. As the Kyuubi responded to him, Naruto kept staring at it. "I blasted my chakra out in my last battle against the Ondaime, and that's the physical form it took," he explained. "You do recall what a chakra is?" As he examined the stone shining in the moonlight, he asked absently, "It's the thing you use for a jutsu, isn't it?" The Biju said, "Yes, Naruto," as coolly as he could. Technically speaking, however, it is the ideal combination of the two types of energy that all people possess. That is, spiritual and physical energy. You perform a jutsu when you ninja channel it through seals. He paused briefly to check if the fool had any more questions before continuing. "You're holding raw, crystallized chakra right now." "My chakra. Given what we've just witnessed, this concentration in particular most likely had a lightning affinity, but I spat out a lot of it prior to being put in this prison. And this is only a small, minuscule portion of it." After giving it some thought, Naruto, who had miraculously been able to follow the Kyuubi's explanation, spoke up. "So you're saying there are more of these things? And that they have different powers?" "Exactly," the demon fox muttered seductively before growling. "But quit referring to them as things, they will feel insulted." He snarled at Naruto once more while rolling his eyes. "I give them a call. Materia." "Materia?" Naruto asked again, struggling to control his laughter. He began, but had to pause to chuckle. "That's what a tracking expert ninja called dog poop during a lesson last year." "Yes, I was present as well, wasn't I?" The Biju, recalling how he had been shocked when that supposed track expert had decided that shit, crap, and poop couldn't be used in front of children, said angrily to the child who was still laughing. As awkward as you get with children, the ninja had paused for a moment to think of a suitable term and had to settle on materia. What a dumb bastard. In any case, as I mentioned earlier, there ought to be a lot more materia worldwide, and they ought to be. Would you stop laughing? Naruto said, sorry, nevertheless guffawing. It's just that in class we joked about that for weeks. It's hard to take it seriously now that you brought that up again. I should have known better, but I hoped you had forgotten about that. So, Naruto continued, still chuckling. Where are all these materia? I'm not sure. Precisely. The boy asked, perplexed. What does that mean? You don't know? I'm not sure, the Kyuubi said again. It split into hundreds or even thousands of tiny pieces and flew erratically in all directions when I released that strong blast of raw chakra. When I launched my last attack, it wasn't like I planned this whole thing, he said. However, they continue to be a part of me. My name is Chakra. For a long time, there was silence. Are you not a fox? I am Chakra, and materia is Chakra, and my own to boot. I can feel their presence, so I know their location. More or less. And you should be able to sense them too. I took the appearances of a fox a long time ago, but what I am, in substance, is a huge concentration of spiritual and physical energy. The Biju sighed at the fool. Me? As Naruto looked thoughtfully down at the stone, the Biju clarified, yes, it is no coincidence that you can see its color while the Chunin teacher cannot. Did you feel anything strange when you took the materia for the first time? The Biju asked. No, I don't think so. Naruto recalled the moment he managed to remove the tiny item from the Yondaime's chin. But when you used it, you felt something, right? Do you feel it now? The boy scrunched up his face in concentration and squeezed his eyes shut. He paused, then said, yeah, I think I do, adding, it's like, I don't know, like having something on the tip of my tongue. Literally or, no. Naruto scowled a little as he attempted to clarify, saying, it's like almost remembering something. Whatever works, I guess. Anyway, try and leave the materia in this clearing while you step away. Let's see if you can sense it, the Kyuubi said ambiguously. When the boy finally closed his fingers on the green sphere again, the previously described sensation of recollection returned to him, proving the demon correct. The boy followed instructions and, much to his surprise, felt something, almost a pull, towards the place he had just left. You can sense it, as I believed, he repeated. Now, can you feel it pull, towards another location? Can you feel some other materia around? He asked. This time, Naruto was silent for a long moment before shrugging and saying, nothing, I feel nothing. Does that imply that there are no other materia in the area? After some consideration, the Biju said, that said, There aren't other materia nearby indeed. Unfortunately, it appears that almost all of them were sent far away from where they had started. The one you hold was probably destined to fall much further, but the Hokage monument must have stopped its flight due to its height. Not necessarily. It could mean that you still are not very well versed in sensing them. This is terrible. This means I won't be able to reach them, Naruto complained. But once you're promoted to genin and sent on missions outside the village, you will. All right. I will finally make genin tomorrow, the blonde exclaimed. The Kyuubi noted, not if your exam goes as the previous two. It will not. Naruto pouted at the materia in his hands. The sphere had reverted back to its original appearances, no longer adorned with bolts of lightning just under its surface. It had also lost some of its warmth while it remained fascinatingly smooth. It won't with this thing. In addition, the fox mockingly remarked, I don't think the academy proctors will ask you and your fellow 12-year-old students to perform a lightning jutsu in the ninjutsu portion of the exam. They will likely ask a henge, a kawarimi, or a bunshin. Electrocuting your taijutsu examiner or burning your written test to ashes won't give you any points, as much as you'd like that. Well, those are not an issue. Pointing to his chest, Naruto boasted, if it comes down to henge, I can demonstrate my flawless Oroku no jutsu and kawarimi faster than the wind. I'll make sure Ruka never forgets the most terrible nosebleed he's ever experienced. How about the bunshin? Inquired the Biju. After a brief pause, Naruto shrugged and said, I'll think about something. Yeah, right. The boy gave the Kyuubi a glare for the next snort, through materia, of course. Well, there's nothing I can do for you about that. Your clones really suck. We can only hope we won't be asked the bunshin tomorrow. The glare grew more intense, but he ignored it. Now, why don't you give the lightning materia another go? Naruto grinned broadly at that, quickly putting aside the irritations of his daily life. He was going to have a good time. A perfect replica of Naruto smiled back at him with a joyful expression as he stood in the center of the clearing, beaming broadly. I succeeded. The real Naruto grabbed the other's arms and threw him into the air, after which he received the same treatment. Both of them cheered and leapt with excitement. It had taken him less than a day to learn the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and even after more than 2 years of practice, he was still unable to control a normal, incorporeal clone, which made it an even more impressive skill. Meanwhile, the Kyuubi was contemplating the same thing, but he was more shocked than happy. What the hell? Naruto took a moment out of his happy dance to boast to his prisoner. Oh, I could do it, I promised, he exclaimed, I'm fantastic. The Biju was still too stunned to respond. For the umpteenth time in the last minute, he thought, this shouldn't be possible. How could this be possible? Naruto. He called abruptly, nearly having an epiphany. Would you please take a moment to read the explanation again? After another round of clowning, the blonde gave his copy instructions to retrieve the forbidden scroll that was lying on the ground nearby, and the Kage Bunshin did so while jumping and backflipping like a fool. The big scroll was soon in the original's hands. It was only after a few seconds that the Kyuubi persuaded Naruto to look at it. Anyway, what's the point of this? The boy asked eventually, annoyed by the other's persistence. He dutifully let his eyes wander through the scroll, though, because if not, his tenant couldn't see it. I already learned it. The fox remained silent for a few seconds before nodding his head. I see, he whispered. What? He clarified, I understand why you were able to learn it even though it's 100 times more demanding and difficult than the Bunshin no Jutsu, and I understand why you just can't manage the latter. What's the reason for that? With curiosity, Naruto inquired. The Bunshin no Jutsu he had used just the morning before had caused him to fail the traditional genin exam for the 3rd time in a row. Despite the fact that he was now going to be genin anyhow, having passed the special test Mizuki Sensei had informed him about, he still wanted to know what went wrong. The Biju said, it's because you always overpowered it. You have to use about 1/100th of the chakra needed to create a shadow clone to create a normal clone. All right. Therefore, it indicates that you possess a significant amount of energy if you were able to produce one of the latter. Doesn't anybody? Naruto inquired bewilderedly. The demon fox eagerly cried. No child your age has the amount of chakra necessary. No. And this is why I previously told you couldn't possibly be able to learn the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. I have a lot of chakra, then, Naruto shouted jovially, high-fiving his confused clone. I'm super cool. Yes, but I think I'm to blame. I suppose my presence inside of you must have caused your chakra coils to enlarge or something. What's my chakra? The Kyuubi said absently, chakra coils. It's where chakra flows inside one's body. Oh, he muttered thoughtfully. Perhaps it's because the chakra leaked out of the cage and through the seal. God knows how long I tried to stop it, but I wouldn't have bothered if I had known it would have this effect. This could prove useful. The idiot was already stronger than most and had a chakra capacity far greater than his peers, but just how far? The Biju continued to think silently for the next few seconds. After remaining silent while considering this new finding, Naruto finally said, "How does this explain why I can't do a bunshin, though?" The fox responded, dropping his train of thought, "What? Oh, like I said, you most probably just overpower it. I don't expect you to know this, but the more chakra you have, the more difficult it gets to control it," he said, implying that I was the only one at the academy who paid attention. "You mean that I use too much power for the bunshin no jutsu and that I have no control over it?" The blonde inquired bewilderedly. "If that were the case, wouldn't I wind up with a super strong clone? Instead, mine appears sickly." "No, making more clones would be the only way for you to avoid making a mistake with that much energy. Why don't you try while we're at it, After giving it some thought, Naruto said, "You mentioned that a shadow clone requires 100 times the chakra of a typical one, correct? Thus, should I make 100? That ought to be clear, wouldn't it? Right?" This time, however, the jutsu was not a failure and on the contrary, Naruto scrunched up his face in concentration and proceeded with the motions he had spent so many hours learning since his first failures. Wow, now, he was surrounded by exact replicas of himself, who moved around as he gave them mental commands, appearing stoic and expressionless. Well, so many already? As he attempted to dodge another one, a clone sped right by him. "Ah, they're normal bunshin?" The cage bunshin asked, his eyes wide. Obviously. With suspicious eyes, Naruto examined his physical replica. "Didn't you hear what we were saying?" As though addressing a slow child, the other began, Naruto, you were talking to yourself." "I wasn't," the original objected, saying, "I was speaking with the fox." "Oh, I couldn't hear that, though. Hold on a second. Hey, there's no fox inside me," the shadow clone said, cocking his head to one side as his eyes wandered. "Or at least he isn't responding." The Kyuubi clarified, "There isn't, of course. You can create a perfect duplicate of yourself with a shadow clone, but I'm not a part of you while I'm inside of you. You don't have that kind of power over me, so you can't reproduce me." The clone was informed of this by the original Naruto. The cage bunshin said, "Well, that doesn't seem such a bad thing," but then he clearly realized something, and he pulled something out of his pocket after snapping his fingers. "But I have this." Before the original Naruto added his own, both Naruto gazed at the green sphere replica in the clone's hand. Everything on the user's body, including weapons and clothing, is duplicated with the jutsu for the duration of the clone itself, the Kyuubi said, rolling his eyes. "Really, if you would just bother reading the whole explanation on the scroll." While the cage bunshin, distracted, had chosen to test his own materia on the normal bunshin nearby, Naruto appeared sheepish. The caster was surrounded by the now familiar circle of green light, and a bolt of lightning struck down on the clones right away, without injuring anyone, except for the ground, which was left blackened after the thunder had stopped, while the incorporeal Narutos continued to move around. The original uttered the words, "Wow," in wonder. "Isn't that neat?" The clone turned to face his creator and asked. "No, I mean, yes," the real blonde's gaze was fixed on the materia in his hand, not even on the spot where the bolt had fallen. In a conspiratorial whisper, the Kyuubi said, "You noticed, huh?" He couldn't help but smile because he had just taken another step toward his freedom. Meanwhile, Naruto's eyes were wide as he nodded. The blonde remarked, "I was looking at it and saw it get bigger, I'm sure of it. Just a tiny bit. I nearly missed it, but I'm positive. Did you also see it?" The Kyuubi responded, "Of course I saw it," but the cage bunshin said, "I didn't see anything." "What's the reason?" As the clone finally realized that the original was speaking to the fox once more, the boy asked in astonishment. "Sentient material exists. Cognitive? Yeah, that means it kind of lives. However, it's only chakra," Naruto objected. "Materia, of course, is not as complex as me, but it still has a conscience," the Biju reasoned, adding, "But that doesn't stop me from talking and thinking, from living." "So, does it simply get bigger over time? Now, if that were the case, the Yondaimi's chin would have a hole 3 times as large," the Kyuubi noted. "So it grows whenever I use it." In an attempt to come up with a coherent explanation for the idiot, the demon fox corrected him, saying, "I said it's sentient, right? Then think about what makes you human, not physically but spiritually." "What is that, too?" Curious, Naruto asked. The Kyuubi stated, "Material grows just like that, mostly. Mainly whatever new experience you have, be it good or bad. This one in particular was used for the first time by a clone. I guess that should be considered a new experience. To what extent does it grow? And does it get stronger the bigger it gets? Inquired Naruto eagerly. The Kyuubi lied and said, I don't know that. I suppose there's only one way to know. Naruto instantly turned to face his shadow clone, his eyes glinting as if he could read the demon's thoughts. What? The Kage Bunshin inquired, a little uncomfortable. The clone was dispelled and the materia grew under the watchful eyes of both the original Naruto and the fox. He was able to jump away enough to avoid taking the next lightning bolt squarely on, but not enough to avoid it entirely. It didn't look more powerful to me, the blonde who was still physically present said with disappointment. On the bright side, however, it grew larger once more, most likely because you hit a real target with it for the first time, the Ebisu said, adding that defeating the clone finally demonstrated my inimitable nature. How was that demonstrated? Puzzled, Naruto asked. There was no clone because I didn't receive any memories from my hypothetical clone. Remembering? Which memories? After a long moment of silence, the Kyuubi spoke once more. He began calmly before raising his voice, saying, I understand that you didn't read the entire explanation of the jutsu, but how the hell could you not notice the stream of memories flowing in your mind? Are you that thick-headed? Hey. Do you really not remember doing what your clone did, including avoiding that lightning, and standing where your clone stood? Well, now that you mention it, if you had read the description through to the end, you would have known that the Kage Bunshin was intended to be a spy jutsu from the start because, once dispelled, the clone sends all his memories to the original. The Kage Bunshin is much more than a normal Bunshin, and not only because it's corporeal and can hit enemies, the fox sighed exasperatedly. Naruto complained wryly, I bet perverts would love it, adding that they could send one to the hot springs without worrying about being found and struck. Most likely, they would even want that. Think about it, but with an enemy camp instead of a hot spring, or recall all those dull days at the academy. With this jutsu, you could have sent a clone to listen to lectures and lessons while the real you trained at home or wandered around the village. That's surprisingly a good comparison, the Kyuubi acknowledged. Naruto exclaimed, wow, this is even better than I thought. Even though the materia was larger, the lightning wasn't any more potent than the first time you used it, the Ebisu continued, but if it doesn't get a little more powerful every time it gets a little bigger, then chances are it will make a greater upgrade once more experience has been piled up. What are you saying? Confused, the blonde asked. I mean, if you use a material enough, it will eventually become significantly more powerful than it was before. Nice. Gazing at the green sphere, Naruto exclaimed, and when will it be? I'm not sure about that. I hope a few hours will be enough because I want to show Iruka both the Kage Bunshin and this, Naruto nodded, his smile not even fading. And the more impressive the lightning, the better. I don't think you should trust Mizuki's words about the so-called special test, the fox said, successfully grabbing the boy's attention. What? The blonde asked incredulous. Why? Well, at best, it is suspicious. You say that, but why? The test is about stealing something, which is strange in and of itself, but since we're discussing ninja education here, it might be accepted as normal. However, the thing that was being stolen was something that was prohibited, and most importantly, it belonged to the Hokage. No, shook Naruto's head in protest. Mizuki just wanted me to know something interesting so Iruka would pass me. Surely a Chunin sensei has a suitable jutsu for a young genin, right? He shrugged his shoulders. So, why didn't he just give you a scroll of his? Why didn't he teach you something? He was hoping for something more spectacular, the blonde answered obstinately. The Ebisu snorted and said, yeah, right. Come on, Naruto. How naive can you be? A doubt began to seep into the boy's thoughts as his tenant went on. I think Mizuki used this to obtain the forbidden scroll. I knew something was off from the start, but I didn't realize it was all Mizuki's fault until I realized that even the old man didn't know anything. That was why you told me not to go to the place he told me about, Naruto quietly replied. And why you told me to run away from the Hokage's house as if someone was following me after one of my pranks. Yes. Why didn't you inform me right away? Before realizing the fool couldn't see that, the Kyuubi shrugged his shoulders. I'm doing it right now. After a long period of silence, in which countless Bunshin roamed the clearing as per the last command they had received, Naruto remained motionless for a further minute before grabbing the forbidden scroll and rolling it. The fox questioned, what are you going to do? Simple, Naruto stated gravely, I'm going to kick his ass at the location Mizuki told me about. What makes you so certain you can? The Ebisu asked, rolling his eyes at the folly of his human container. The fact that I'm pissed. The Kyuubi gave a snort. After all, it will be your word against his, the fox continued languidly, so what makes you so sure the Hokage will believe you when you bring him the bloodied Mizuki? After giving it some thought, Naruto said, I'll make the bastard confess. The Biju simply sighed in exhaustion and rolled his eyes. I have a better idea, if you don't mind. What is it? Admittedly, the boy's initial idea was becoming less appealing by the moment, so he reluctantly asked. I advise you to utilize your greatest abilities, which are stealth and now Kage Bunshin. After giving it some thought, Naruto gave up. How can we accomplish that? From inside his cage, the Kyuubi began to smile wolfishly. I've got a plan. Mizuki returned home exhausted and furious. He was in dire need of a shower and a restful night's sleep after what had been, to put it mildly, a long and challenging day. He blamed the bastard demon for the plan's failure, which had not gone as planned. He turned on the lights, stumbled inside with a loud yawn, and shut the door behind his back as he considered this for the umpteenth time in the past day. He knew right away that something was wrong. There was a faint light coming from the room beyond, and the kitchen door was not quite as he had left it, nearly shut instead of open. Mizuki crept over to the opening and pushed the wooden door a bit harder before he gasped. At the sound, Uzumaki Naruto's head snapped toward him from behind the open refrigerator, looking at him in astonishment. Oh, Sensei, it's you, he exclaimed, holding a piece of cheese that he had just eaten. About time. I waited for you for ages. After a moment of shock, Mizuki composed himself and could only grit his teeth at the blonde in a dangerous way. All this time he had been here, in his own home. Additionally, he wasted a great deal of time running around the village. A wild chase that lasted nearly the entire day. The bastard was nowhere to be found and had not gone where he had told him. No one had been able to locate him despite dozens of shinobi and teams being sent after him. At last, the Hokage had cancelled the search and given one tracking team the responsibility of returning the boy and the scroll. In the interim, he had been. Suddenly, his rage-filled mind expanded on its previous thought. He whispered, the scroll, and fixed his gaze on the large item in the kitchen corner. All of his research and study had led him to recognize it. The scroll of forbidden. Yeah, I took it like you told me. Had to knock out the Hokage to do that, though, I hope Oji-san doesn't punish me for that. Naruto grinned broadly. A second later, however, it dimmed. But I couldn't learn anything on it. It's so complicated. I thought you could give me a hand in reading all those kanji, though. Can you, Sensei? Mizuki started laughing as soon as Naruto concluded his entreaty. Oh my! He exclaimed. You brought it to my house. I hadn't hoped that much after the last day. Naruto had a perplexed look. Sensei? The Chunin chuckled once more. After I waited for you in front of the house in the woods and you didn't show up, I had thought you had seen through my trick, Mizuki said with a maniacal grin. But now you're here, in my house. The man snorted when Naruto asked unsurely, trick? Did you really think I would tell you to steal the forbidden scroll just to let you pass the genin exam? Mizuki responded in jest. You're an idiot. I only used you to get my hands on it and put all the blame on you. He continued to laugh. You made me sweat for a moment, but you did a good job, demon. The Chunin was not prepared for Naruto's bewildered expression to abruptly vanish. Then the blonde fool raised an eyebrow and slowly folded his arms. Looking to the left, he questioned, don't you have enough now? At that, Mizuki scowled a little and opened his mouth to speak, but then he felt them. Ninja. The kunai in his hand appeared before his next frown. He instinctively took the best course of action given the circumstances. He went after the demon. He had just released the kunai when he was rendered totally immobile by a searing pain on his neck. However, the brat's helpless expression as he watched death fly towards him allowed him to smirk a little with satisfaction. Then another kunai suddenly materialized, struck Mizuki's with a loud clang, and changed direction. Both weapons, one on each side of the blonde, were embedded in the wall behind him. During a period of total silence, Mizuki's thoughts became even more homicidal. The demon then muttered in amazement, wow, that was so cool, and Budat-san. Like, super fast. Two men wearing masks came into view, but neither of them responded in the slightest. The child smirked and shrugged his shoulders, but the awe in his eyes did not diminish in the least. The blonde addressed the two Anbu before turning to face the perplexed Mizuki. Well, gotta go now. Naruto wanted to know about this meeting as soon as possible, she said. Well, thank you for the food, Sensei. And for everything else. Bye. The shadow clone vanished in a puff of smoke a moment later, taking the forbidden scroll with him. As his captors moved closer to him, Mizuki could only curse the demon brat inside his head once more. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage of Konoha and god of shinobi, realized that the shadow clone had been scattered and that its memories had been transferred to its master as soon as Naruto blinked owlishly in front of him. Additionally, the boy's subsequent smile revealed to him the type of memories they were. The blonde exclaimed, "Anbu are awesome," as he turned to face the two masked people standing next to him. Mizuki. Sensei practically didn't even have a chance. The Hokage brought the pipe down to his lap and puffed out a cloud of smoke. After the boy nodded in agreement, he continued, "I gather that all went according to plan, then?" Sarutobi's face became more serious when he saw the boy simply smile at the praise, clearly pleased. "Good. Now, while we wait for the Anbu to bring their report, what do you think of trying and explaining what happened since yesterday? I only know what you told me after you almost sneaked past my personal guard. That was impressive, by the way, especially considering the whole village was looking for you at the moment. Now explain." It only took a glance for the Hokage to order the masked men out of his office after Naruto shifted slightly in his seat and looked self-consciously at them. He called out, "Bear," and one of the two Anbu briefly halted. "Iruka-kun should be waiting outside. Tell him to handle Mizuki's report and whatever non-classified paper comes. The rest can wait. I don't want to be disturbed for the time being." After nodding, the masked ninja vanished behind his fellow Anbu. "Yes, Hokage-sama," he said. Sarutobi smiled back at the boy's subsequent expression of gratitude, but the calmness on his aged features could not last forever, because Naruto then began to speak. At first, it was as he had anticipated, and the boy's words only confirmed his preconceptions. After the boy failed his genin exam, Mizuki approached him and deceived him into stealing the forbidden scroll by promising that if he learned one of the jutsu in it, he would pass the special test. In order to find him right away after confirming that everyone was blaming the boy and that no one was pursuing him, he had instructed Naruto where to go train with it. Soon after the tale began to veer in the direction of demon foxes conversing with their host and magical spheres of chakra, the Hokage would think that everything had been reassuringly predictable. At the end of the report, all he could do was look back at Naruto without emotion, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just heard. Naruto and Kyuubi no Yuko were on good terms. That was astounding in and of itself. Although Sarutobi had assumed that Jinchuriki and Biju were two separate beings not in contact with one another, only Minato knew the precise function of the imprisoning seal. Naruto's first 11 years appeared to be sufficient evidence of that. Rather, even though the seal might still have been changed, it appeared as though the demon had purposefully avoided the boy, only to come clean and tell the truth when his host had discovered one of those materia 2 days earlier. Speaking of those enigmatic weapons, Oji-san. He was successfully distracted from his thoughts by Naruto's voice. At some point in his reasoning, he had gotten up and moved to his office window, his eyes still resting on the Hokage monument. He turned around with a serious expression after letting out a weary sigh and examining his own carved face. "Is the Kyuubi listening right now, Naruto?" he began. After a brief pause, the blonde nodded. The Hokage said, "I need to ask him something, without hesitation. I need to know why he contacted you." After a long pause, Naruto spoke while cocking his head to one side. The boy said simply, "To help, of course," but it was obvious that he was quoting his inner prisoner. With a furrowed brow, Sarutobi questioned, "Help Naruto?" "Myself, mostly," he says, Naruto said, frowning in confusion. "What does that mean?" After a further minute of silence, comprehension dawned on the young blonde's face. "Oh, he says he will die when I die, so he hopes he'll help with postponing that." The Hokage, who had already made that guess, nodded. "He says he gave me a hand many times in the past by healing me and keeping me healthy despite atrocious conditions," the boy continued, finishing with a pout. "What does atrocious mean, Oji-san?" "It means bad, Naruto," said Sarutobi in a small voice. "Very bad." The young blonde shrugged and said, "Oh, it wasn't so atrocious." The elderly man in front of him smiled at him sadly. "Anyway," he said, "he says he didn't have to talk to me to help me at the time, but he was the only one who could have possibly explained me what materia was and how it worked, so he did." The Hokage nodded and said, "I understand," somewhat alarmed by the demon eloquence. At this point, the boy stopped suddenly and scowled angrily, probably at his inner tenant. He also wanted me to become a genin and finally train for real, and he even. "Hey, I'm not like that. That's cheating." His brow furrowed even more, and he remained silent for the next few seconds. He yelled angrily, "What does that mean? Cheating is kinda the point of being a ninja. It's not mine, anyway. And then, not yet, but I will ace the next exam for sure. I even learnt the Bunshin no Jutsu now. After a little more complaining, the boy fell silent once more. Sarutobi, who had been a little uneasy about the little show, was able to get the blonde's attention at last. What was all that about? Naruto frowned. The stupid fox wanted me to cheat at the exam, he sighed, but I said no. Not much more knowledgeable than before, the Hokage attempted again. Care to explain? He knew the answers to the written test, but I didn't want him to tell them to me. It just wasn't fair, Naruto grumbled. He bothered me the whole exam about it, and I swear I botched it because of all his nagging. The boy kept pouting and huffed angrily. On his part, the Sandaime was unable to hide his smile. While I commend you for your great sense of rightness, he said in a low voice, it is true that as a ninja you will find yourself in situations where cheating is the only route available or simply the best one. Naruto moved slightly in his chair. The Kyuubi says it is almost a job requirement, he stated. Something like it, concurred Sarutobi. After giving it some thought, the boy clearly made up his mind. I don't like it, was all he said, and that, the Sandaime said, his smile growing wide, says a lot of good things about you. This final dispute. It had been trivial, almost silly, in and of itself, but it had also given the old man important information that he needed to know. Naruto Uzumaki was still Naruto Uzumaki, or it appeared to be. He had worked as a shinobi for so many years that he could be fairly certain that the boy's words and appearance were honest. The young blonde appeared to be completely unaffected and unmanaged by the demon fox. It was a huge comfort. After hearing Naruto's story, the Hokage had to acknowledge that he had entertained a dangerous thought, and while he was still unable to completely rule it out, it certainly seemed much less likely now. He began, Naruto, in a low voice, how much, in contact are you two? Naruto blinked quizzically and said, He just talks with me, Oji-san. With suspicion, the Hokage demanded, is that so? The blonde paused, cocking his head to the side, just as he was about to continue. The kid in orange said, the Kyuubi claims that he sees what I see and hears what I hear. After a brief silence, Naruto went on, he's aware of my whole body as well, although not as if it was his own. He says it's a strange feeling. But my mind is my own and so it's my chakra. He doesn't have access to those. Sarutobi gave a nod. Given that the mind and chakra are, at least in part, spiritual, it made sense. Biju and Jinchuriki shared the body, but that was all. I have another question for him, the Sandaime said abruptly. For the time being, the Kyuubi had appeared to be transparent about everything, so it didn't hurt to inquire. Why are you telling me all this? Aren't you afraid I'd do something about it? Before quoting, the kid in the orange outfit cleared his throat. The blonde paused and pouted for a moment before reporting what he had been told. You say that as if I had a choice on the matter, he says. Naruto is. The blonde scowled angrily at this, expressing to the Hokage his own thoughts on the subject. Naruto is a stubborn idiot. He wouldn't even listen to me when I tried to explain to him why secrecy was the best route to take here. Besides, what could you do, old man? Sarutobi gave those words a slight blink. There was something odd about them, even in Naruto's voice. He stopped and his eyes widened. I could always take this materia from him. I could even try to alter the seal in order to, said he. He said, and maybe that's exactly what you're aiming at, in a sympathetic mutter. The Hokage narrowed his eyes and said, you hope that me tinkering with it will give you a chance to escape. Something to exploit? Is that so? Before continuing, Naruto cocked his head to the side. As the Sandaime scowled, the blonde reported, then why did I wait this long before speaking to Naruto? It would have made more sense for me to alert you immediately, if I thought that plan could work. I make it no mystery to anyone, let alone Naruto, that if I could get out of this damn body at all, I would do it at once. But I also think you idiots are not idiotic enough to risk that so easily. By then, the blonde boy had joined the Sandaime in frowning, but he was still talking. As for the materia, Naruto is a ninja, or would have been, probably, if he had listened to me during the exam. Another grimace. It would make no sense for you to take a weapon, and such a useful one to boot, away from him. The Hokage remarked, unless I deemed it dangerous for the village or for Naruto himself. It seemed as though Sarutobi could hear the Kyuubi smirk in the child's voice as Naruto began. Then, he said, I must probably be certain that you will not deem it dangerous. Be my guest, Sandaime. Take the materia and examine it to your heart's content. I have nothing to hide. After giving it some quick thought, the elderly man held out his hand. He made it obvious that his talk with the demon was over by asking the boy bluntly, "May I see this so-called materia, Naruto?" With a frown still on his face, the boy fumbled in his pocket and a moment later came up with a simple round rock of modest size. "Here, Oji-san." Taking the sphere, the Sandaime used all of his senses to examine it. Actually, he didn't taste it, but he did all the other things. And the outcome was nothing. The rock appeared to be just that, a simple rock. Coarse, cool, and gray beneath his fingers. He was unable to detect anything out of the ordinary, even with his chakra senses. "That's strange," he whispered to himself. "Are you sure this is the materia?" The boy gave him an odd look as he nodded. Sarutobi kept turning the object over in his hands, saying, Before deciding on a course of action, he returned it to Naruto. "It seems a normal stone to me." Iruka didn't notice anything either, stated the blonde. "The fox says I'm the only one who can see it green, gleamy and all that. He says that it's because the materia's chakra and mine are similar to his." The Hokage gave a somewhat skeptic's nod, but he reminded himself to send a Hyuga to investigate and see what emerged. He could also ask Kakashi. It was uncertain whether his Sharingan could. Then the idea came to him. Kakashi, naturally. The Sandaime's mind began to spin wildly as Naruto let out a wide yawn and blinked tired tears from his eyes. Yes, he thought. It might work. When Sarutobi looked at the boy in front of him, all he saw was a blonde, hyperactive child who needed to be acknowledged and was now exhausted. Not a monster, not a demon. Only a child. He gave a small laugh. "I've come to my decision, Naruto." He pulled out a leaf head protector from a drawer on his side of the desk as he was saying that. Then, beneath the boy's widening eyes, he placed it on the wooden surface. Since the blonde didn't appear to be planning anything, the Hokage spoke up once more. "This Hite-ite is yours. Genin Uzumaki Naruto. You earned it. Come on, take it." Naruto swiftly extended his hand at that moment and wrapped his fingers around it. He exclaimed, "Really?" Before leaping to his feet and slapping his fist in the air. He turned to the Sandaime and exclaimed, "Hell yeah. I'm a Genin. I'm awesome. You are awesome, Oji-san." When the boy put on the head protector, Sarutobi let out a hearty laugh and waited for him to stop his justifiable celebration. The Hokage quickly steered the conversation to another intriguing subject that they had not yet thoroughly discussed after he had dutifully explained to the young Genin the privilege and responsibility of being a shinobi of the leaf. A lengthy and somber discussion about the Kyuubi, the law of secrecy pertaining to him and Naruto, and what to do about it ensued. Although he acknowledged that he didn't think the situation was as dire as the Sandaime, Naruto also stated that he would rather keep the truth a secret for the time being. Sarutobi set all those things aside for the moment when he saw Naruto yawning once more. He said softly, "Well, it's time for you to rest. Remember that tomorrow you will be taking the photo for the shinobi registration book. It will take place 2 floors underneath us." Naruto said, Yeah, you already told me, Oji-san," as he got up and stretched happily. "I won't be late." He led Sarutobi to the doors, which he opened. His words were, "I wasn't worried about that, more about Naruto." From the far corner of the room, where the Chunin was seated at a desk organizing papers and files, Iruka's voice cut them off. But he soon left them behind to go over to the blonde boy. The man began, "Naruto, are you?" but stopped when he saw the head protector, wearing a Hite-ite. "Yeah," exclaimed the young ninja. "I'm a Genin now, sensei." The Hokage chose to speak up after noticing Iruka's bewildered yet joyful expression. He smiled and said, "You have already read the report, haven't you, Iruka-kun? And don't you agree with me that what Naruto did, given the situation, was deserving of the title of Genin?" "Yeah." Naruto repeatedly nodded his head. "I totally owned Mizuki. Baka. Plus, I learned a super cool new jutsu, together with the Bunshin no Jutsu. Take a look." Having said that, he clenched his face tightly and executed the well-known hand seals. Before long, the entire room was crowded with tiny, giddy Genin who were jumping and laughing with excitement. When Iruka saw that some of the incorporeal clones were making faces at the Hokage's back, he quickly recovered from his shock. The Chunin eventually located the real Naruto and struck him in the head after some initial difficulty. Under the Sandaime's amused gaze, he then went ahead and gave him an earful. Sarutobi let out a satisfied sigh as he saw the 2 young shinobi leave the scene, Iruka scolding Naruto and Naruto shrugging at him on their way to the door. "Bear," called the Hokage. "Keep me up to date about Mizuki's situation. I want to know if there's anything else other than greediness behind what happened." Quickly, yes, Hokage. Sama, was the response. The elderly man took a few steps toward his office and then stopped. He said, and, please, get rid of all these bunshin, with a weary expression. All this orange is giving me a headache. Yes, Hokage. Sama. When Uzumaki Naruto and Amino Iruka left the Hokage tower, the Chunin was still lecturing the younger ninja. If the genin hadn't been so adamant about the fairness of free ramen in this case, he probably could have avoided that. It was clear that the older man had a different viewpoint, and he made sure to explain it to his young charge. Iruka exclaimed, and then, making faces at the Hokage. With frustration. What possessed you to do something like that is really beyond me. It's not polite to do that to anyone, but he is the leader of the village and the most respected person in Konoha. It's even your dream to be in his place someday. So doing that was really. Are you even listening to me? Iruka continued to walk, leaving Naruto a little behind after he stopped just outside the tower. Although his gaze shifted up and down the tall building in front of him, it appeared to be fixed on it. Naruto? The boy turned to the Chunin and asked, huh? Sorry, what were you saying? Iruka rolled his eyes at his student, who was frequently distracted. Nothing, he sighed in the end. Come on. I'll buy you ramen. However, Naruto had stopped paying attention to him. Once more. He was blinking constantly now that his gaze had returned to the tower. With a furrowed brow, Iruka questioned, what's the matter, Naruto? Then, with a small smile, he gave him a sidelong push. Still green spots in your vision? The genin questioned bewilderedly, green spots? Before recalling their discussion on the Hokage monument. Slowly, Naruto's face also broke into a big smile. You can say that. Following a brief period of silence, Naruto resumed his stroll. So, you mentioned ramen, right? Iruka gave a snort. You have good ears when you want to. The Kyuubi no Yuko stretched his limbs idly as the two shinobi headed for the Ichiraku ramen stand. Did you not notice it? He said in a playful whisper. Naruto didn't have a clear response, but from the demon's perspective, there was no need. Uzumaki Naruto walked idly down one of the Hokage Tower's numerous corridors. He could now focus on what had been his main focus since the previous evening, since he had already taken the picture for the shinobi registration book. The second, correct one, according to Oji-san. The young boy, who had just been named Genin by the Sandaime himself, had made the decision to move to the 5th floor and try his plan there after an unsuccessful attempt in the hazardous 4th floor. Fortunately, he had not yet met anyone on this new floor, not counting the little brat who was following him, of course. Naruto gave a frustrated huff. To avoid drawing attention to himself, he had attempted to ignore the boy who was rumored to be the old man's grandson up until that point, but now that the hallway was empty, he decided he had had enough. He yelled, "Stop following me," as he turned and gestured, "and you aren't fooling anyone with that." Grinning, the grandson of the Hokage emerged from his hiding place. Impressive to see through my cloak of invisibility technique. Naruto broke out in a sweat. You were just hiding behind a wallpaper. The boy protested, this is a highly valuable disguise jutsu, and the genin snorted. Yeah, just like stalking and checking on me from a corner is the proper spying method, the brunette replied. Please. Looking at the hitte-ite on the other's forehead, the old man's grandson complained. It's easy for you to criticize, you're already a ninja. I have yet to enter the academy. Naruto stated plainly, Bah, at your age I was already running circles around the Anbu chasing me. The academy didn't teach me anything that I hadn't already known about sneakiness. That caused the boy's eyes to enlarge like discs. Before a smirk returned to his lips, he asked in amazement, Really? He yelled, Hey, I'll make you my boss. At that moment. And in exchange, please teach me the Oroku no Jutsu which you defeated Gramps with. Naruto gave his eyes a few blinks. Boss? The blonde gave it some thought before agreeing when the boy simply nodded. Alright, he replied. You're my underling, now. The Kyuubi then concluded that he had been silent long enough. What do you do? Naruto approached the window nearby and began to open it as the young boy cheered. What do you mean? As if practicing all morning, he asked in his head. He peered out into the crisp autumn air and took in his surroundings. He mumbled, perfect, when he found what he was seeking. The Biju reminded him, we're here to get the materia you finally sensed yesterday. Idiots need to be watched over. I already have one. The genin finally understood after a moment. Hey, he yelled in protest. From behind him, the Sandaime's grandson asked excitedly, Yes, boss? Naruto paused before returning inside. Yes, he said. Stay quiet for a moment. The boy scowled a little but followed instructions. Will you please stop bothering me now? After a while, the blonde genin returned to his internal dialogue with his tenant. This speaking but not. Quite thing still doesn't come naturally to me. The demon fox rolled his eyes from inside his cage. How difficult could it be? As he made his way down the hall to the third window, Naruto complained about something. It's unclear. The Kyuubi snorted, whatever. Get that materia, please. The young ninja opened the window and said, as you can see, I'm working on it. Finally, he turned to the old man's grandson and said, okay, aloud. What's your name again? The boy said, I'm Konohamaru, with pride. Naruto gave the order, okay Konohamaru, the first assignment I give you is, go to that end of the hall and check out for anyone coming, and then he nodded to the opposite side. He will take care of the other end. He had barely finished speaking when a cage bunshin materialized at his side with a quick hand seal. The genin went on, gesturing toward the open window. I have to take something important out there. The genin began to take pleasure in this small game and said, if anyone comes, just let me know and try to buy me a little time. You're allowed to use any means possible to do that, okay? The shadow clone obediently barked, right away, boss, and shifted into position. Konohamaru stared at the copy for a long moment, then mirrored him and walked down the corridor. Naruto rubbed his hands together and said, okay, after that, time to get a new materia. The young genin inhaled deeply before moving toward the window and cautiously placing a foot outside and on the fifth floor's narrow ledge. With his back to the building and his hands clutching whatever fingerhold they could find, he began to slowly sidestep to the left as soon as his second leg joined the first with his entire body. People went about their daily lives beneath him, coming and going from the Hokage tower without looking up at the boy doing his balancing act on the ledge. Naruto eventually arrived at the end of the ledge and, fortunately, the ideal location after a few feet in a near-death experience that would have likely cost him his life. With caution, he removed his left hand from the structure to dab at his perspiring face. He released a breath he didn't even realize he was holding, and the wind pressed against him. Naruto had sensed the green spot from the Hokage's office the day before and had seen it from below, but he had not anticipated that it would be this hard to reach. Located exactly between the fourth and fifth rows of large windows facing the street, the materia appeared stuck in the front of the building. He had originally intended to try to retrieve it from the fourth floor, but the sheer volume of people moving up and down those corridors made that impossible. Instead, the fifth floor appeared nearly deserted, making it the best option. Naruto wasn't so certain of that now, though. The materia he had seen had to be exactly beneath him, since the metal railing he had used as a reference was below and a few inches to his left. He knelt down as much as he could, rubbing his back against the building and panting a little in fear, feeling the now familiar pull towards it. He made several attempts before he was able to wrap his fingers around one of the railing's cool bars and begin brutally gripping it to test its stability and solidity. After taking a few deep, reassuring breaths, he twisted his body around and leapt down from the relative safety of his ledge before he could change his mind. He grabbed a metal bar with his other hand right away, then he was able to gather his thoughts and locate the fourth floor ledge. The Kyuubi, who had up until that point avoided talking to his host in order to avoid disturbing his focus, chose to voice his opinions, allowing Naruto to finally breathe a sigh of relief as he found himself in a balanced position. And this is exactly why I told you to use a kage bunshin to do it, he began, emphasizing the final word. Naruto waited for his heart to stop racing before responding, albeit in his head. It was enjoyable, the blonde remarked plainly, glancing to his right. The green ball he had seen from the street below was there, nearly embedded in the wall. For a moment, his right hand moved away from the railing and moved toward the warm materia, gently brushing it. When he retracted his fingers, the faint feeling that he was about to recall something vanished from his mind, and the young genin smiled. The next few minutes were entirely devoted to using a kunai to chip away at the object, but unlike the materia that was adhered to the Hokage monument, this one was extremely difficult to remove. However, Naruto eventually succeeded in removing a significant portion of the building's stonework, leaving the green sphere still embedded in it. He winced slightly at the harm he had done to the Hokage tower, but he reasoned that since no one could see it from the street below, it was all right. He had just stuffed the big rock into the pocket of his jumpsuit, trying to squeeze it in as tightly as possible given its size, when he sniffed the air and froze. Finally, very slowly, he turned around and saw two male ninjas standing in the big window on his left, watching him. One of them, with a short black beard, was smoking a cigarette and observing him with interest. Leaning comfortably against the windowsill, he cocked his head sideways as though perplexed. His voice was deep as he asked, What do you think he's doing? In reality, the other ninja had silver hair and was presently crouching on the fourth floor ledge, directly outside the large window. He appeared to be extremely bored, as evidenced by his long arms hanging almost languidly over the edge. The half-lidded eye that was not covered by a black mask and was staring at him also illuminated the impression. I don't know, he uttered indifferently, but I hear he's quite the troublemaker, so he's probably just making trouble. The first mumbled frowningly. Removing a chunk of tower doesn't seem much of a prank to me. Slowly, the masked shinobi shrugged. Who knows what youngsters think these days? The bearded ninja shot back, still, did you see how he climbed down here? And the other ninja nodded. He waved his hand dismissively and said, that was mildly impressive for a fresh genin. He has the awareness of a deaf mole, though. It took him so long to finally pick up our scent and notice us. The smoking shinobi pondered for a moment before continuing. In his defense, the wind wasn't in his favor, and then added, as an afterthought, and we're Junin. I think I want him in my team. The man in the mask snorted. As if our preferences are ever taken into consideration when it comes to assigning a genin team. The man gave a grimace. God knows if I know that. Oh, the bearded ninja's face took on a mockingly innocent expression. Did I ever mention my father to you? You probably know him by the name, Hokage. All the other shinobi could do was laugh. Behind that mask, he said, I may have heard about him, with a smile, or at least what Naruto believed to be a smile. Good luck with the brat, then. The two men then turned to face the blonde, whom they had largely disregarded in favor of their brief exchange. Naruto, who had been unusually silent up until that point, made the decision to speak. He brightly said, I need your window, just as he leapt on it. The bearded one placed a firm hand on his shoulder to steady him as the other two stepped aside to give him room. After a moment, Naruto descended and landed on the crowded fourth floor, where a dozen or more eyes were staring at him. He gave an indifferent shrug. In any case, he was already apprehended. The tiny genin pivoted to gaze at the pair of ninja. They both wore Junin vests and appeared to be having fun with the situation. Naruto briefly considered slipping away, but ultimately decided against it. That had very little chance of happening. Although he had previously escaped from Anbu and Junin, he usually had an advantage when he did, whether it was a head start or the aid of confusion his pranks frequently provided. He didn't have any this time. Then he would stay and see what transpired. After all, he hadn't really done anything wrong. Anyhow, what was a tiny hole in the stonework of the Hokage tower? Naruto finally said, nonchalantly, thank you for opening that for me, pointing to the window. I was already dreading the wall. Climb to the 5th floor. The shinobi in the mask gave a charming smile. I can imagine. That rock must really weigh a lot. That made Naruto laugh uneasily. Yeah, a little. I could carry it for you, the man with the silver hair continued, laughing pleasantly. I'm a Junin, so I'm pretty strong. The blonde boy scratched the back of his head and said, don't worry about it, hastily. I'm a genin, so I'm pretty strong too. He grinned laughingly at him and the other ninja. He exclaimed, well, time to go now. Bye. And ran down the hallway, relieved that the two weren't after him. He dodged a young employee as he disappeared around a corner. After extinguishing his cigarette, Sarutobi Asuma tossed it into the adjacent ashtray. He whispered, curious kid, after a brief period of silence. You heard about what happened with the academy teacher. Hitaki Kakashi leaned against the wall and nodded. I was one of the guards who finally caught him when he almost sneaked up to the Hokage. And I was one of the ninja trying to track him down and failing. There was Inuzuka Sume with me most of the time. Asuma laughed quietly. She curses worse than a sailor when she's annoyed at herself. Kakashi even cracked a small smile. I've been in enough missions with her to know that very well. The bearded Junin finally said, come on, and began to leave. Let's go to the meeting. I want to see if I can coax the Hokage into putting Naruto on my team. The ninja in the mask slowly detached himself from the wall. Don't get your hopes high. Asuma gave the Junin a curious look because of something in his tone. You know something I don't? Maybe. The man's eyes focused intently on Kakashi's meticulously expressionless face. Does that have something to do with why you insisted a little on that chunk of rock? The only response he received was silence. Asuma continued to walk down the hall with a thoughtful expression on his face. Oh man, I thought that was just you having fun and giving a kid a hard time. Now, though, interesting. Up until the team assignment meeting, they remained silent. By the time the boy made it to the 5th floor via the stairs, Naruto's heartbeat had slowed to normal. Thinking about what had happened, He strolled down the desert corridors until he came upon his bewildered shadow clone. Naruto shrugged when the Kage Bunshin asked, "What are you doing here?" "I got a little help and entered the building from the 4th floor." The clone shrugged too, then eagerly leaned forward. "Did you get it, though?" Naruto grinned briefly. "I did." "Cool," the original asked. "How are things up here? Anything to report?" "No, sir." The Kage Bunshin saluted and barked dutifully. No one entered the perimeter. The young blonde arched his brows and gestured over the shoulders of his subordinate. "What about that man over there?" When the shadow clone turned around and saw Konohamaru flailing around in a ninja's tight hold, he cursed. Meanwhile, as he struggled to break free, the boy yelled, "Let go of me!" But the man holding him seemed unconcerned. He adjusted his dark glasses appropriately and said, "Come on, young master, instead. We already wasted a lot of time and we have yet to finish this morning lesson." The Hokage's grandson said loudly, "I don't want to, Ebisu. Sensei," as he clumsily attempted to kick the ninja out of his challenging position. "Put me down." "Hey!" Naruto exclaimed as he moved forward with his shadow clone. "Let him go." When Ebisu finally noticed Naruto, he scowled at him. "Well, them." The man growled, switching his eyes from clone to original and back again. "Stay away from the honorable grandson, Naruto. I don't want him to be influenced by the likes of you." After glaring back at him, the two Narutos turned to face one another. Their faces lit up with two identical smiles, and they moved forward. Ebisu grinned. When one of the two blondes raised his hands to form a seal, he crouched it down to a fighting position and mockingly said, "Hey. Do you think you can take me on? I'm an elite tutor, not an academy brat." Naruto uttered a single word in response. "Kawarimi." A moment later, Ebisu clutched the orange-clad genin rather than the Hokage's grandson, and he blinked his eyes owlishly. The young blonde he was holding gave him a radiant smile. Peek. Boo. Ebisu managed to catch a glimpse of the other Naruto, who was most likely the original, fleeing with the young master. At that, he snarled and attempted to throw what must have been a shadow clone. But the copy grabbed hold of his arms and wouldn't let go, so he failed. The boy was so slick that he was able to wrap himself around his back and then his midsection before the man could force him against the wall. The honorable grandson was nowhere to be seen by the time Ebisu reached the end of the hallways and the flight of stairs, but he only lasted a dozen more seconds before being finally dispelled by a blow to the head. He screamed, "Damn you," and charged down the stairs. When Naruto finally stopped, they had just arrived at the woods. After their wild run, Konohamaru immediately collapsed on the soft ground, wheezing and panting. He began, smiling despite the painful burning feeling in his lungs. "This is the first time I shake Ebisu Sensei off, ever." Almost a little exhausted, Naruto asked inquisitively, "Really?" Konohamaru slowly acknowledged, "Yeah. I can only get away from him when I get him really distracted. He finds me almost instantly. And even then, I have minutes of lead on him. He finds me almost immediately," the boy said, panting. "This time, we had him hot on our heels, for nearly half an hour, and we were still able to get rid of him." He cracked a grin. "You're great, boss." The blonde genin whispered, and kept blinking his eyes. He appeared thoughtful for a moment as the Hokage's grandson caught his breath. "It's the same for me and Iruka. Sensei. He's always the one to find me. Maybe it's a teacher. Student-related thing," he said. "We may be onto something here." Konohamaru simply shrugged, showing little interest in that. "Oh, right." Naruto's expression brightened as though he had just recalled something. "We went through a lot of trouble, but I got this." Konohamaru's face fell as Naruto's hand shot out of the pocket of the jumpsuit. He questioned incredulously, "That something important you had to take was this? A rock?" Naruto pointed excitedly at the green sphere that was glaring out of the large, gray stone and exclaimed, "Not just a rock. You see?" After a brief moment, he remembered that only he could see its dazzling color and gave up. Naruto huffed as the boy said, "I don't see anything," with skepticism. He glanced around before approaching a nearby clearing and said, "Never mind. Come on. I'll teach you the Oroku no Jutsu while I clean up this thing." "Yes!" exclaimed Konohamaru, raising his fist in the air in celebration. With Konohamaru listening intently to every word, Naruto began to explain the foundation of his own created jutsu as he sat down on a cozy log and began to chip away at all the stonework surrounding the materia. However, he soon had the boy practicing because the blonde genin found himself teaching in the same manner that he had learned by trial and error. Slowly but steadily, Konohamaru advanced, and Naruto finally gained a rough idea of how much more chakra he possessed than other children. Loads more could be used as a rough estimate. Konohamaru was so tired that he had to stop 3 times. 3 times. Despite the fact that the Hokage's son was a few years younger than him and might have had lower than normal chakra reserves for his age, Naruto could still vividly recall the hours he spent trying and failing to learn whatever just he needed to learn. And those recollections went all the way back to when he first enrolled at the academy, which is to say that he was roughly Konohamaru's age. The entire issue was worth investigating further. That being said, those downtimes weren't too bad. As Naruto worked to shape the materia, Konohamaru gave an explanation for why he always pursued his grandfather. When the boy talked about being acknowledged and being Hokage, Naruto found himself encouraging him in his own way, almost as if he were listening to himself. While Konohamaru continued his training, he also made the decision to give him some advice on sneakiness, as he called it. The Hokage's grandson had the jutsu essentially mastered by the time Naruto had finished polishing the green stone. That's it, more or less, smiled the young blonde in compliment. Just practice a little on the nipples and it'll be perfect. Konohamaru returned to his normal self and asked excitedly, "Really?" Naruto gave a nod. "Yep." "Hey!" the boy exclaimed, abruptly turning to face his boss's hands. "You made a sphere out of that chunk of stone. You're pretty good." "I didn't," the genin irritatedly huffed. "There was already a sphere inside that chunk of stone." The grandson of the Hokage appeared doubtful. "Really?" Before deciding, Naruto bit his lip and said, "Yeah, really. Just wait and see, okay? I'll show you something cool." The blonde turned to a rather large boulder nearby and moved away from Konohamaru as he spoke those words. As the Kyuubi had instructed him to do for the lightning materia, Naruto slowly raised his hand and summoned the power within the sphere, a sense of excitement growing in the pit of his stomach. Just as a large block of ice rapidly formed around the target, green light rose around him as usual. Naruto was left watching in dismay just before the ice broke with a loud clatter and the boulder was shattered along with it. As Naruto and Konohamaru watched in amazement as the frosted fragments of rock fell apart, sliced apart like a sharp sword, silence fell upon the clearing. When Konohamaru finally spoke, they had just halted their movement. He turned to the blonde with wide eyes and exclaimed, "That was awesome, boss," with excitement. "What a great ninjutsu. I bet even Grandpa would be impressed by it." "Yeah," Naruto said, chuckling and gathering his thoughts. "I bet he would." The boy stared at the sphere in the blonde's hands and asked, "Was it that stone?" Naruto also looked at the materia. Despite being clearly made of ice, it was oddly warm under his fingers, and beneath its green exterior, there appeared to be tiny crystals floating. Konohamaru asked eagerly, "What is it?" But the Kyuubi gave a menacing growl before the genin could respond. "Naruto," he said ominously, "it was one thing to tell the Hokage the truth, but try not to keep this story a secret from the public, would you?" The blonde thought back, rolling his eyes. Yeah, I know. It's for my own benefit. I don't want people to believe that I have a lot of ties to the Kyuubi, materia will be my secret weapon, and so on." "Naruto, I recognize you. Probably better than yourself," the Biju remarked, irritated by his derision. "Additionally, you were certain to blurt out everything." "I wasn't." In response to Konohamaru's question, "Boss?" the genin gave an outrageous response. After letting his host know what he thought of his final remarks with a snort, the Kyuubi fell silent. After muttering a complaint, Naruto turned his attention to the boy before him. He was searching for a smooth transition when he said, "Sorry, air," and then it literally fell from the branch of a nearby tree in the shape of Ebisu. The young blonde said sagely, "Last piece of advice about sneakiness, don't stay in the same place too long when hiding, unless you're completely sure you won't be discovered there. And, as a last-minute addition, wherever you are, refrain from using loud and flashy jutsu. They tend to give your position away." The man yelled, "I've finally found you," while scowling at the ninja in orange. "It's been tougher than I thought, I'll give you that. Now I understand why accomplished shinobi find it so hard to catch you after one of your pranks." It was the indirect praise that made Naruto smile. "Yeah," he exclaimed. "I'm that awesome. But playtime is over," he added icily. "Let's go home, young master." "No," said Konohamaru. "I'm going to defeat that old geezer and get the Hokage title, so don't get in my way." Naruto fingered the new materia in his palm and then pocketed it while Ebisu and his pupil argued. He wasn't fighting this. At least not yet. Oroku no jutsu. As the man with the perverted face continued to talk about how such a dirty trick couldn't possibly work on him, The genin watched with raised eyebrows the effect Konohamaru's hanged body had on his teacher and could only perspire. The final straw was what he said about the blonde and about becoming Hokage. Without giving it much thought, Naruto moved forward and made a seal. The Kyuubi was shocked when he yelled, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," and 15 shadow clones materialized in front of him. What the devil? Bewildered, the Biju thought. Then, in stunned silence, he watched as his host used what he referred to as his harem no jutsu to defeat the enemy ninja. After a long period of silence, the demon fox finally sat down to wait for the moron to conclude his brief speech of inspiration before leaving. But then he raised his voice, as sweetly deceptive as he could manage. "Naruto?" With his hands behind his head, the boy continued to smile foolishly as he made his way to the actual village. "Yes." The Kyuubi inhaled deeply. "How much can you do with fucking clones?" For however long it took him to demonstrate, Naruto's ears rang. Finally approaching the shop counter near the door with a load of long-range weapons carefully held against his chest, Uzumaki Naruto was frowning a little. He kept his head down to avoid tripping over the stands on his way and, more importantly, to avoid the owner's stern stare. Naruto had never liked going shopping, and the reason was pretty clear. When he finally arrived at the counter and placed his purchases on it, he looked up to see a sour expression on the man's face. Slowly the store owner said, "Let's see," before lowering his gaze to the goods. A standard set of kunai, one of shuriken and 2 rolls of konoha wire. He grumbled, "It's 7,000 ryo." 7,000? Naruto exclaimed abruptly. "It's not possible," the price tag said. "I just changed them," the smirking man said, interrupting him. "Now pay, or get lost." The young blonde's mouth opened to respond, but he quickly closed it again. He was not going anywhere with this. He looked at the man for a long time, enjoying the satisfaction of seeing him writhe a bit, and then he turned around. "You can keep your damn stuff," he declared after making up his mind. "It's not like I really needed it, anyway." The owner yelled after him, "Get out of my shop, then," but he didn't bother to respond. However, he saw someone from the adjacent sword sector staring at him as he was leaving the store. Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto turned slightly to face him and muttered, "Teme," in a bland voice. He got the expected response, "Dobi," but he couldn't help but growl at it. As far as Naruto could recall, he was the only person Uchiha Sasuke had ever greeted since he had first seen him. Other pupils, Academy Sensei, significant ninja who occasionally give lessons. Uchiha Sasuke never once bothered to greet them. The dark, piercing eyes that shifted to them with varying degrees of intensity and attention were the only indication that he was even aware of their presence. With the exception of training or academy assignments, the dark-haired boy largely ignored everyone except himself. And while it was accurate to state that it was also the result of provocating, Naruto occasionally didn't need to risk anything to elicit a response. That had always baffled the young blonde. Given that the Uchiha genius's greetings were consistently insulting and that the words reserved for him were typically anything but courteous or cordial, he assumed he should have felt honored to be worthy of such consideration, but he doubted it. However, he couldn't help but wonder. After staring at him for a while, Sasuke turned to face the store owner. The man immediately began bowing heavily toward him. An apologetic, "Oh, Uchiha-san, I didn't see you enter," he said. "Can I help you in any way? Were you looking for something in particular?" After giving the man a disgusted look, Naruto went outside, feeling a terrible sting behind his eyes. After a long moment, he swallowed hard and grinned grimly. The man would soon get what he deserved, at least. Uchiha Sasuke followed the Dobi outside, but he wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps it was because he hadn't planned to buy anything at all, or perhaps he didn't like the shopkeeper's actions. However, he ultimately concluded that it was most likely due to his curiosity. Sasuke's gaze returned to Uzumaki Naruto and the leaf head protector he was not supposed to wear as he left the store. He tried to avoid staring at it when he was beside him, as he always does, but the blonde turned to face him in astonishment. Quietly, the Dobi growled, "What do you want?" With a shrug, the boy with the dark hair turned back to the future. "I never liked that guy either." And it was accurate. Like a fangirl, the store owner would always throw himself all over him. They weren't old men with scars and a mustache, and he was already disgusted by them, typically. "It's that guy that doesn't like me, more like it," Naruto snorted in response. Then, like his blue eyes, his smile flashed. "And I guess he will like me even less now." Something smashed and clashed inside the store at those words, and then there was a shout of rage. Sasuke turned to look at the chaos curiously. He inquired, "What did you do?" Innocently, Naruto replied. Me? I did nothing, and the Uchiha turned to face him just in time to see the Henge no Jutsu seal. Upon the eventual clearing of the smoke, he saw a smiling but flawless replica of himself. You did. Abruptly, the shop door flew open, and another Sasuke rushed out. An additional one behind him was only able to cross the threshold once before it was dispelled by what appeared to be a mallet that flew to his head. The shop owner emerged from the doorway a moment later, his eyes enraged and his head adorned with white feathers. Additionally, a big, orange slimy substance was discoloring his chest and slowly seeping onto his shoes and stomach. You little brat! Yelled the man. I know it's just you hanged as Uchiha-san, wait up. Sasuke frowned and turned to face the Dobi, who was exactly the same as him. Naruto. The impersonated Uchiha snarled menacingly, waiting for him. Drop the henge. Sasuke in real life scowled. You drop it, idiot, if you don't. However, he never made his threat because the shopkeeper threw a kunai at him, and he had to leap away to avoid it. After glaring at the criminal for a while, he concluded that Naruto was the true culprit. His mind full of murderous ideas, he shot after him as he saw him fleeing. About 10 minutes passed during the chase. After 5 o'clock, they had already shaken the man off, but the Dobi who was still posing as him had kept running. Of course, he did more than just run. He fainted and distracted, he backpedaled and was bewildered, and he hid and hindered. Every time one of those weird, almost physical clones suddenly materialized and seemed to switch places with the original, Sasuke had to forfeit valuable seconds. Once he made up his mind who to follow, he fell further behind. 10 minutes later, he was gone from Sasuke. He was astonished, impressed, and furious. The copy of himself he had been following was nowhere to be seen, and he found himself in a narrow alley in the commercial district. A dead end with no doors or openings. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the area, then kicked a trash can loudly in the side, toppling it and sending the twisted metal fragments it held to the floor. I win. He was terrified by the voice. Even as he spun around as quickly as he could, a kunai already in his hand, Sasuke was startled. The Dobi, now restored to his former self, was smiling triumphantly in front of him. When Sasuke snatched him out of the jumpsuit and threw him into the air, the smile vanished. As he landed on another garbage can, the blonde exclaimed, "Hey," and he was dispelled. Before the Dobi's recognizable voice reverberated in the alley, the young Uchiha was left staring at the spot where the clone had vanished. This new Naruto remarked, "That wasn't very nice," from behind him. With a sudden sense of calmness, almost detachment, Sasuke turned to face him. "What's this technique?" he inquired, observing the smile on the other's face. They cheered. "It's awesome, isn't it? It's called Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and it's a forbidden technique. I learned it some days ago and I already love it. It requires loads of chakra but I have it in spades." At that, the Uchiha arched an eyebrow but remained silent. Before he spoke, there was a brief period of silence. Feeling as though he had missed something, he inquired, "What happened in that shop?" As he examined the kunai and shuriken and attempted to avoid the owner's eyes, he had been watching the Dobi for a while. He had also noticed the changes in his features after being treated that way and bringing the goods to the counter. It had been odd. It seemed as though he had hoped against hope right up until the last second and was left feeling depressed and disappointed. As though to validate his thoughts, the blonde's smile wavered briefly before returning with a vengeance. "I taught that jerk a lesson," he exclaimed. "Did you see what an idiot he looked with those feathers plastered to his head?" "I meant before that," adamantly Sasuke said. "What was that ridiculous price about?" Naruto halted and averted his gaze, his smile suddenly becoming melancholy. The boy sighed a little and then smiled broadly once more. "I had thought that once a genin, they wouldn't have continued to, that they would have acknowledged me. But I guess it's still too early, right? I'll just have to try harder." Sasuke was a little curious about what the Dobi was discussing, but he chose to dive right in since he had finally arrived at the subject that piqued his interest. "You're a genin?" he queryingly inquired. The blonde shouted, "Of course I am," while gesturing to his hite. "Are you blind, Teme?" "But you failed the exam, Dobi," the Uchiha shot back, emphasizing the final statement. "You weren't able to perform a single effective bunshin." Naruto yelled, "As you could see, I can now, with urgency. And I passed a special test which I can't really talk about." After giving it some consideration, Sasuke finally decided to believe him. Naruto showed that he could perform clones, albeit not the fundamental kind taught at the academy, and he couldn't have been so foolish as to wear a fake head protector knowing the consequences. This special test, which he was not allowed to discuss, obviously smelled fishy, but Uchiha, who was young, turned away. He wasn't entirely satisfied with his curiosity, but he was unable to express it to the fool. He left the alley and began to walk. "Whatever, Dobi," he said in a condescending tone. "I still need to buy some things, and so do you, I believe." Naruto frowned and then shrugged. "Well, you're almost right. It's not exactly me that has to buy something." Curious, Sasuke looked back. "You're a clone?" The Uchiha grinned as the blonde nodded his head. "Really? Then you won't mind if I do this." As he finished speaking, he had already reached the Dobi, who was caught off guard and could only sidestep the left kick before being struck in the face by the subsequent blow. Only a smug Sasuke remained after the blonde vanished in a puff of smoke a second later. Before dusting himself off and leaving the alley with his hands in his pockets and a contented smile on his face, the dark-haired boy took a moment to look around. From atop a nearby roof, concealed by a gray chimney, Naruto observed the proceedings. He blinked, recalling the strange conversation with the Uchiha and the memories of the recently expelled Kage Bunshin. "That Teme," he muttered frowningly. "That was completely uncalled for." He saw the boy leap down to the alley and then vanish among the onlookers along the street. Idly observing that the toppled trash can was filled with broken iron and other metal pieces, he approached it and straightened it up. "Damn," he murmured to the Kyuubi. "Sasuke is definitely quick." "You just noticed now?" The demon mockingly asked him. "He constantly kicked your ass at the academy." "He didn't." "That's correct," the Biju snorted. "It must have been my imagination. In any case, training can resolve that issue, and your Kage Bunshin are currently doing just that in the forest." As soon as the boy had shown that he could make hundreds of clones, the Kyuubi had demanded it. They had stunned the demon. At first, he had assumed the fool simply had a lot of chakra, which was amazing given his age but not something a typical Junin would boast about. Rather, Naruto was revealed to be a chakra monster, easily on a Kage level from that perspective. The idiot couldn't stop grinning when he told him that it had been a pleasant surprise for both of them, but it was crucial to use it effectively right away, and Kage Bunshin training was most likely the best way to do that. "From what I'm remembering," the genin grinned, "they're going crazy over there. I'll soon surpass Sasuke in speed." The Biju continued without rolling his eyes, saying, "Instead, you have something he will never have, no matter how or how much he trains." At that, Naruto gave an owlish blink. "You?" As Naruto took his two spheres out of his pockets, the Kyuubi affirmed, "I was primarily talking about materia, but yes, me as well. And you can take another step toward using it, and me, properly today if you stop wasting time." There was no point in wasting time, the young blonde objected. "No holster in that bastard's shop was good enough to fit your suggestion, and now that I'm a genin, I could use some new shuriken and kunai. Mine are crumbling." "However, they aren't as significant," the demon yelled. "How many times must I tell you this? Finding a suitable holster for our materials is currently our top priority. If your hands are already occupied with holding the materia, what use is it to be able to perform jutsu without the use of hand seals?" The Biju gave a frustrated huff. They had already talked extensively about this. Naruto could theoretically execute those techniques and use his hands for other purposes, such as punching, grabbing, or parrying, by utilizing materia to avoid the seal-making process that is typically necessary in actuality, fighting. However, simple pockets or even standard holsters weren't ideal because he still needed to touch the sphere for it to function. How long did it take the moron to realize what was going on? "I already understand." As if reading his thoughts, Naruto complained and kicked the trash can he was sitting on with his heels. "And I did search that store for something helpful. If you choose to do these things round-shaped, it's not my fault." As though to emphasize a point, he waved both of the materia in his hands. "There are no holsters for round objects because no one has ever holstered round weapons." Ignoring the blonde's sniping remarks, the Kyuubi thought, "Then we will have one custom-made. And we'll make them ourselves if that doesn't work either." Still mistreating the bin beneath him, the young genin muttered angrily, "I'm no good at that kind of things." He was eventually sidetracked from the conversation by the loud clinking noises the trash can was still making. He scowled. "Hold on a second." Leaping down from his elevated position, he peered at the heaped trash inside the bin and beneath its lid. It was all metal, twisted chunks of iron, fragments of weapons that were either unrecognizable or recognizable. He had noticed them when the trash can had fallen over, as had the second shadow clone that Sasuke had vanquished, but neither had paid them much attention until now. Naruto looked around the alley at the tall buildings. The left one was a tailor, and the right one was a restaurant. There are no armories or weapon stores nearby. This was not very logical. He began to pace close to the walls and look around, occasionally sniffing the air as though he was looking for something. After gradually beginning to notice something odd himself, the Kyuubi stayed silent. A few minutes later, Naruto abruptly halted and leaned to his left, seemingly determined to hear something over the din of the nearby busy street. Then he heard it, a faint clanging sound that sounded distant. He reacted quickly. He dashed to the alley's end and looked down. When he finally found what he was searching for, he exclaimed, "There," with joy. A thin, nearly invisible crack ran a few inches from left to right on the ground in front of him, just short of the wall that marked the dead end of the alley. A large rectangular stone, well hidden in the pavement, was located directly next to the crack. Naruto exhaled with excitement and then pressed the stone down hard after lightly touching it with his fingers. After a single click, the ground to his left appeared to give way and unfold itself, revealing a steep set of stairs that led down to a dimly lit room. When Naruto's eyes finally locked on the young girl below ground who was staring at him in disbelief, they widened like discs. The youthful genin smiled uncertainly. "May I come in?" Tenten was always a girl of strength. Since she was very young, long before she joined the academy, and long before she became a shinobi of the leaf, her family and friends had told her that over and over. The lethal techniques she learned in training and her impressive skills with various weapons had nothing to do with her strength. She corrected herself and said she was now a ninja. Fortunately, she had been raised in a household where becoming a ninja was the standard path for everyone, and she had not been spared because she was born a girl. As if that weren't enough, she had spent a significant amount of her early years with a group of friends, being the only girl and youngest. Whether it was due to her upbringing or a personal tendency, she became the epitome of a tomboy. However, in the past year, she has grown to embrace a side of herself that she had not previously acknowledged as feminine. That's what her mother had said, anyway. Naturally, her mother had also claimed that she had gone through the typical rebellious stage that all teenagers go through, and Tenten thought that was complete nonsense. She followed her own desires rather than those of others. She couldn't deny that her family had steered her in that direction, but in the end, she had made the decision to become a ninja because it was what she wanted to do and she had every right to do so. Regardless of what her father said, the same applied to what she was doing now. But when the trapdoor above her abruptly opened, all these lovely ideas of freedom and independence vanished from her mind. When she realized that a small blonde boy wearing an orange jumpsuit and a leaf head protector had opened it instead of her father, her heart leapt to her throat in terror before falling back to its proper position. May I come in?" Her breathing resumed and her heartbeat slowed as a result of the words, which were spoken with such hesitation. She explained that an unidentified boy, whom she immediately changed to ninja, had just unlocked the location's hidden entrance. The ninja smiled brightly as she asked, still a little stunned, "Who are you?" He bellowed needlessly, "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage of Konoha," and his voice reverberated throughout the subterranean room. "What are you doing down here?" Tenten chose to ask one herself, ignoring the question, "How did you find this place?" "Oh, I was sitting outside and thought it was strange that all those bins had inside were pieces of metal or broken weapons," he continued. As he stepped down the stairs, his excitement was clear. "I looked around and noticed the crack near the wall. I found the switch, pressed it and it opened this secret passage," he said. "May I?" Tenten walked around her workstation and then nodded. She admitted, "I hadn't considered taking out the trash. But what I'm more worried about is that you actually found the switch without knowing what to look for." She was grumbling. "Grandpa just showed me the secret entrance. He didn't tell me how to conceal it." "Oh, don't worry about it," the blonde ninja, who was most likely genin like her, said, gracefully leaping over the final few steps. He shouted, "I'm pretty good at this kind of stuff. Hiding places are my thing," as he peered around inquisitively. "Are you hiding yourself or something in here?" The girl gave a slightly apprehensive smile. "Both," she acknowledged. She walked to the stairs, lightly brushed her bare arm against the young ninja's hand, and let out a breath of relief she didn't even realize she was holding. "In fact, I better close the entrance before someone sees it." She trusted them as much as the kunai and shuriken in her holsters, and when she had touched this Uzumaki Naruto, who had declared himself the future Hokage of Konoha, they had assured her he was not a threat. Her father would chastise her for basing her judgment on her ridiculous powers. She had yet to find a better term to describe her strange ability to feel others, so she couldn't recall exactly when she didn't have it, but she was certain that the incident had been the catalyst. Since then, she has lived her entire life with these odd abilities that her father disapproved of. They have gradually changed into more complex forms. In order to understand them, She now had to turn to specialized knowledge like astrology and I Ching hexagrams, but her ability to sense the intentions and emotions of others through touch has largely stayed constant. There was no reason not to be friendly. The orange-clad ninja had only evoked fascination and curiosity. She hurriedly shut the underground chamber's entrance while keeping a close eye on the outside until the very last second, and then she turned around. The young blonde had wasted no time in exploring the area. From the large, now cold hearth behind the desk to the metal material set up in a corner, his wide eyes moved from the large anvil in the center of the room to the tall wooden tank filled with water on the side. He began in astonished to say, "Don't tell me," but she cut him off. "Although we don't really deal with gold here," she smiled and said, "My name is Tenten," before pointing down with her hand. "This is my family forge, the Golden Dragon." The words were so familiar that she couldn't help but smile nostalgically. Even though years had gone by, he had heard them so often as a child, from her mother, father, or brother, that they came to her almost instinctively. She found herself imitating their tone exactly, even the one they had always used. It was almost like having a customer again as she gazed down at the odd ninja looking up at her. Her chest began to tingle at the thought, so she chose to laugh about it for a while. The words came out of her mouth with the practiced ease of someone who knows them by heart, but as she considered the present, they left a bittersweet aftertaste on her tongue. "We produce everything a shinobi might ever need throughout his life, from common but high-quality throwing weapons to rare and deadly chakra blades and armor." She thought about it for a while before making up her mind. "The actual shop above us is closed at the moment, and the few things I made are on the cabinet over there, but I can accept requests if customers actually have any." With a broad smile, Naruto approached the cabinet in question. His eyes wandered over sets of kunai and shuriken, as well as short and long blades, almost pressing his nose against the displaying glass. He turned around and gave a sharp squirm. "This is incredible. I was just looking for weapons and here I am. In an awesome secret forge," he exclaimed. The genin actually paused to glare at the empty air to his right for a considerable amount of time, giving Tenten the impression that someone had shouted in his ears. "But," he complained, clearly irritated, "I have to buy something else first." The brunette gave the strange boy a suspicious glance. "What were you looking for?" As the young blonde clarified, something of a weapon holster, a very particular one, though. I've been in another weapon shop a little while ago and they had nothing even remotely similar to what I had in mind. That's pretty much what I was going to work on next, mixing protective metal with fabric. I had armored meshes in mind, but weapon holsters might be even better," the brunette began as she descended the stairs. She blushed a little, deciding that it was time to reveal a little bit of truth, even if it meant looking foolish. "I'm basically new at this. The shop has been closed for years now and the forge unused for nearly as long. I just started blacksmithing a few months ago under my grandfather's directions and, well, I'm still testing my skills, that's it." "These look great, though," Naruto remarked with admiration as he examined the weapons in the cabinet once more. Thanks. Grandpa as well told me they're good," she said, a little self-admiringly. "He's an expert blacksmith, although he's retired, and he's not the kind of person to praise lightly, so I'm pretty happy about what I've done." Tenten was briefly reminded of her friend and teammate Rock Lee and his naivete when the blonde genin asked inquisitively, "Why are you hiding it then? Is it forbidden or something?" The girl gave a slight grimace. She watched the ninja in front of her unsurely before deciding, "You could say that. My father doesn't want me here. He closed up our Golden Dragon 6 years ago, and when I voiced my interest in our family art of blacksmithing almost a year ago, he prohibited me from ever coming here." The blonde scowled as she inadvertently allowed her annoyance to come through in her voice. "Why? Because he's a scaredy cat." Naruto jumped a little at the unexpected outburst, and the brunette instantly turned a bright red from losing her temper in such a way. "Sorry. It's just that this entire thing makes me jumpy." She inhaled deeply as she tried to collect herself and wondered why in the world she was discussing this mess with an unidentified ninja. She thought to herself, probably for the same reason that she allowed him to enter the underground chamber. However, there's still time to change the subject. She recomposed herself and said, "Anyway, you said to be in need of a weapon holster and the next step of my training would probably include something like that." After her little outburst, she tried her smile and was pleased to find it so easily. "If you agree, we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone." That was likely due in part to the blonde ninja's infectious smile. He immediately yelled, "That would be awesome," and moved to join her. "I would have probably ended up getting a custom made anyway, so I was lucky to find you." "You did mention you need a very particular one," she said. "What is exactly the weapon you have to holster?" It was as if Naruto's smile could have gotten any bigger. He took out a round rock from inside his pocket. This. Tenten's forehead wrinkled curiously. A stone? It's not a. He began angrily, then he sighed. It's not a simple stone, it has powers. Tenten arched a suspicious eyebrow at that, and in the minute that followed, the young blonde attempted to describe what his materia did using ambiguous language and examples. It didn't work in regular pockets or holsters, and he didn't want to hold it constantly, but apparently it allowed him to do some sort of jutsu simply by touching it. Tenten thought it sounded like a story that had been conceived on the spot, and as a result, her initial enthusiasm began to wane. Listen, she said doubtfully, perhaps it would be better if you simply demonstrated this materia power to me. In the middle of his hesitating explanation, Naruto paused to survey the room. In here? The brunette asked, a little curiously, why not? Is this jutsu so wild and destructive to threaten the whole place? After giving it some thought, Naruto shook his head. No, it's rather controlled, actually. Tenten said, it's perfect. Then, with a hint of challenge in her tone, she took out a long wakizashi from a hook in the cabinet and showed it to him, saying, I still have to try my hand at chakra weapons, but I did use part of a chakra resistant metal to make this blade. With a quizzical blink, the young blonde said, you want me to use it as a target? What if I damage it? With assurance, the girl stated, I don't think that will happen. Grandpa checked it and told me I had done a good job with it. It will be able to withstand the stress of a single jutsu easily. Before becoming determined, Naruto appeared to nearly frown at the blade. Okay, he said with a small smile. Let's do it. Tenten grinned as he stepped back a few paces and placed the wakizashi on an iron stool. She saw the young blonde gaze down at the stone in his fingers before mysteriously returning it to the right pocket of his pants. He pulled another one just like it out of his left pocket and held it slightly forward a second later. A green light appeared to instantly filter through the cracks in the pavement surrounding Naruto, illuminating the dark underground room with its fluorescent color. Tenten was shocked to see that the wakizashi blade and a portion of the iron stool beneath it were coated in a thick layer of what appeared to be ice. When it broke, it shattered like a fragile crystal in the hands of a negligent man. Oh my goodness, she muttered in shock as metal fragments fell to the floor with a loud clatter. A second later, Naruto yelled, but, you said it would have withstood the jutsu. With a cheated, possibly panicked, tone. I didn't want to destroy it. For a few seconds, Tenten simply gazed with wide eyes at the broken weapon and stool. She finally said, blinking repeatedly, don't worry about it. Really? The brunette looked at the blonde and the stone in his hands and said, yeah, I honestly didn't expect that. Either Grandpa lied to me or overestimated my wakizashi. Naruto smiled in response. Or maybe I'm awesome that way. Maybe, Tenten said, nodding her head in agreement. Anyway, I'm going to make a better one soon. After making a materia holster, of course. At those words, the blonde's eyes glowed brightly. Really? That's great. Tenten approached the desk and knelt down to look inside a sizable box beneath it, saying, now that I saw what it does and how, I think I got a better idea of what to make. When her fingers found what she was looking for, she nodded approvingly, saying, I should have some iwa paper in here. Here it is. Iwa paper? Inquired Naruto. What is it? The brunette got back up and held out the long, smooth cloth to him. She studied it carefully before explaining, this is iwa paper. It's a kind of fabric renowned for its high chakra conducting qualities. It would be very impractical to create a holster with holes or empty parts where your skin would touch the materia. It's way simpler if I use this. Your chakra will just flow through this cloth from your skin to the materia it will holster. And with just a few armored parts, it will be incredibly resistant, elastic as well. Naruto closed his mouth just as he appeared to open his mouth to speak. When the orange-clad genin cocked his head to the side and then abruptly woke up, Tenten began to wonder about that. That's right, he exclaimed. Elastic, it needs to be elastic, the materia will. They will get bigger as I use them. Is that a problem? The girl asked. How much bigger? Another lengthy pause occurred during which Naruto appeared to be giving it considerable thought. Not much, probably just half an inch or so. Tenten said, then it won't be a problem at all, and nodded. Thinking aloud, she approached the desk and wrote something down on a scroll. The iwa paper will stretch to let the stones fit and the armored parts will secure them firmly. If I heat the dark steel a tenth more than normal, I should be able to mix it together with the cloth and a fine mesh. And if I cool it quickly enough, the final crystallized texture will result in a stronger composition. The right proportions should probably be just an altered version of the Fudan armor, given the elements and characteristics they will have in common. What? She looked up to see the blonde genin in front of her looking around unsurely. Tenten started to explain, but she was stopped by the utterly perplexed expression on his face. She couldn't seem to stop smiling. Don't worry about it, Naruto. I'll handle it. She watched him open the hidden entrance and arrive at the alley with a broad smile on his face after Tenten assured him that the holster would be ready by the beginning of the following week. They spent the next few minutes discussing the final details. The tingling sensation in the brunette's stomach returned with a vengeance, widening it even more as she found herself smiling too. And officially, the Golden Dragon had a customer once more. As she began working on Uzumaki Naruto's request, she kept thinking about the joyful idea. I think I know who will be our Junin sensei. Haruno Sakura turned curiously to the speaker at those words, relieved that the awkward silence had finally been broken. From the open classroom doors, Uzumaki Naruto, her new teammate with Uchiha Sasuke, shrugged under her scrutiny. After a brief pause, he added, I met him 3 days ago at the Hokage Tower. He and the Junin with the beard who left with Shikamaru's team were talking about the team assignment meeting with the Hokage. I was looking for both of them earlier but didn't see him. I guess he is our late sensei. Sakura looked at Sasuke-kun and asked, what is he like, hoping he hadn't picked up on her nervousness. Eagerly, the blonde genin leaned forward. He grinned and nodded his head. He has a mask covering his face from his nose down and silver hair spiking up wildly over his head. Protector. And even above, only his right eye is left visible because he keeps his hite-eye askew to cover the left one. Sakura blinked once, then scowled in disapproval. With her hands on her hips, she scolded Naruto, saying, stop making things up, Naruto. How can you expect us to believe something like that? When Sasuke raised his voice from his seat, the orange-clad ninja had already begun to argue his innocence. Did he look strong? The ensuing silence left the pink-haired Kunoichi staring a little. She gave the dark-haired boy a long, inspiring look before beginning to do so more covertly. That is, with her mouth shut. At those words, Naruto scowled a little and turned to face Sasuke, observing him cautiously for a considerable amount of time. I only met him in a hallway, he wrote. I guess he seemed very ninja-like. After giving it some thought, the Uchiha turned away once more and nodded in comprehension. It was a near miss, but Sakura was able to avoid gaping this time. For the umpteenth time that day, she asked herself in her head what had transpired between Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke. It was hard to imagine that something didn't have to. With her eyes still secretly watching the two, the Kunoichi left the sensei desk and began to move up and down the classroom. Behind his dark fringe and steepled hands, Sasuke-kun appeared as cool as ever. Perhaps a little less energetic than usual, Naruto was still his typical foolish self. No, she told herself again, there was no difference between the two boys individually. It simply occurred during their conversation. When the blonde began boasting to the class about his genin status and the secret that surrounded it, Sakura had realized something was wrong. When her classmates first asked Naruto about his head protector and his presence there, she happened to be looking in Sasuke's general direction. Unlike the other people there, including Sakura, she didn't notice any surprise or skepticism on the Uchiha's face. Instead, he appeared to have known that already, but he also appeared intrigued by it, despite his ability to hide it. However, Sakura was obviously the one who knew her Sasuke-kun the best, and after all, she was a shinobi trained to read and decipher body language and facial expressions. She believed that something had occurred between them for precisely that reason, because occasionally, when she looked closely at them, she would see something else on the dark-haired boy's face that she had never anticipated seeing there, and that was most importantly aimed at Naruto of all people. When they were left alone in the classroom, she had noticed it for the first time. In the first few minutes, all her attempts to strike up a conversation with Sasuke had been crushed down in a manner eerily similar to how she had crushed Naruto's, and every other team had left the room. The ensuing quiet had been extremely uncomfortable and awkward until the young Uchiha himself didn't, predictably, speak up. He had turned slightly in his seat and smirked as he said to Naruto, I met your clone yesterday, you know. Clones, really, the ninja in orange had corrected irritably, and you just had to go and dispel both of them. The blonde had given him a harsh glower for his silent gloating, and Sasuke's smirk had widened. Naruto had returned poutingly. It wouldn't have happened if you hadn't surprised them like that, he said. Really, attacking when there clearly was a truce on, that was a dirty, underhanded trick if I ever saw one. At that, the boy with the dark hair had lifted both of his eyebrows. There are no underhanded tricks when you're a ninja. At that point, Naruto had a startlingly irritated expression. Why do you all say the same thing? You make it sound like tricking and cheating is the right way to go." Sasuke had scoffed and said, "Maybe because it is?" The blonde had obstinately objected, saying, "Well, I don't like it at all. Now that I'm a ninja, I'm gonna do it my way. And I'll be the best one ever and show everyone which the right way is. Believe it." Sakura had first noticed Sasuke's peculiar gaze at that point. The dark-haired boy had just stopped appearing cocky or even, dare I say it, conceited and had simply looked at the other ninja with reverence. Understanding. Well, that wasn't quite correct. Perhaps, yes, acknowledgement was it. Uzumaki Naruto was being acknowledged by Uchiha Sasuke. Whatever, he had finally said, turning away and brushing the whole thing aside. After Naruto's sputtering put an end to the argument, silence fell again, this time more awkwardly than before, if that was possible at all. Like the strange conversation that had just ended about their supposed masked, silver-haired sensei, Sakura had replayed the bizarre scene in her mind over and over again afterward, unable to make sense of it. Nevertheless, one thing appeared to be obvious. Sasuke gave Naruto a new look, one that was undoubtedly better than the one he had kept for her, or anyone else, for that matter. Despite the fact that many people tried in vain to gain the recognition of the Uchiha genius, the blonde fool had somehow succeeded. Sakura couldn't think of a satisfactory explanation for why. It couldn't have been Naruto's genin status, she was now one herself, but he still treated her like a bother, regrettably. Or how the blonde had achieved it. The pink-haired kunoichi was certain that Sasuke was unaware of the major secret. What might that have been, then? After considering this, she decided to watch for the time being in the hopes of figuring out the answer by examining her two new teammates. She told herself she was good at it, she was capable. But there wasn't much to see for the time being. Sasuke simply remained motionless and silent in his typical position, ignoring everything and everyone, while Naruto appeared somewhat exhausted, as she had previously noticed, and demonstrated this by sagging on his desk and seat and taking an unceremoniously long nap. This left her to continue to wonder. It took over an additional hour before the classroom door abruptly slid open with a loud crashing noise. After the dull wait, she nearly fell asleep on her desk and bounded to her feet. Naruto essentially mimicked her, but before his eyes actually opened, he muttered a slurred, "Wah." Sasuke simply cocked his head in the direction of the doorway and the stranger standing there. Sakura was secretly shocked to learn that the man in front of them was, in fact, silver-haired and nearly entirely hidden by a mask and head covering. In addition, he was extremely tall and, in spite of his thin build, imposing. As he absorbed the scene, his eyebrows went up a little. He gave Naruto a particular glance. "We see again," he uttered practically languidly. "Last time I caught you stealing, now sleeping. I don't know if I can call it an improvement." Sakura and Sasuke's curious looks caused Naruto to flush a little. He yelled, "I wasn't stealing," and then used his orange sleeve to wipe his mouth. Sasuke sneered, "And I wasn't sleeping either." The blonde blushed a bit more and then pointed accusingly at the man standing in the doorway. "And even if I was, it's your fault for being, 3 hours late? What's your excuse?" The Junin said, "I got lost in the path of life," with such a straight face that Sakura was at a loss for words. Was she meant to chuckle? She simply scowled at him, following Naruto's example. The blonde genin yelled, "What a lame excuse," but the man dismissed it. "It's true. Now, please, come with me to the roof." He simply walked out, anticipating being followed. Sakura did so conscientiously, turning to face a sputtering Naruto and a composed Sasuke. The Junin was leaning against the railing when they arrived at the academy roof, and he began to speak after motioning for them to take a seat. His expression was only a little interested. "So, let's begin with some introductions, likes, disliked, dreams for the future and things like that," he said. "Who's gonna start?" With a slightly rebellious tone, Naruto said, "Why don't you do it first?" He took a seat to Sasuke's left, and she took a seat across from him. The man said languidly, "Oh, me? Well, my name is Hitaki Kakashi. I have no desire to tell you guys my likes and dislikes. Dreams for the future, I have few hobbies." After those words, there was silence, and Sakura turned to face her teammates. As though seeking confirmation, she inquired, "So all he told us is his name?" The two boys simply didn't seem impressed. When the Junin finally said, "Now it's your turn, let's start on the right." Sakura's eyes went to the blonde genin who had already begun introducing himself, and she could see that she had perked up at that. However, she chose to focus most of her attention on observing one Uchiha Sasuke and only half. Listen to what he had to say. She observed that the dark dark-haired boy initially appeared uninterested, while Naruto discussed ramen as if he were an obsessive person. However, his expression changed when the idiot began to babble about becoming Hokage. The kunoichi with the pink hair squinted. It was impossible to miss now that she knew exactly what to look for. There was no denying that Sasuke truly acknowledged Naruto, but the reason he did that was something she couldn't help but question. The brilliant Uchiha didn't really believe the blonde could be Hokage, did he? Sakura gave a small shake of her head. That was incorrect in a lot of ways. As Sasuke began to speak, she reminded herself that there must have been another response. She briefly halted her argument to give the boy's introduction more attention, and she couldn't help but blush when he said it. He was really awesome. Okay. Kakashi's voice recalled her to reality, and lastly the girl, Pinky. Sakura turned to the man, a little startled. He gave her a long, expectant look before making an ambiguous hand gesture to reassure her. She took a dry swallow. Oh no, she was too preoccupied with her two teammates to have considered what to say to him. Well, she began tentatively, blushing a bit. My name is Haruno Sakura. The thing I like is, well, the person I like is. And my dream for the future is. She briefly glanced in Sasuke's direction, but quickly turned away in a dejected manner. Her chest felt like a dagger as the boy's typical mask, which was cold, uncaring, and even contemptuous, slipped back on his face. She didn't want Sasuke-kun to think that of her. She wanted him to regard her with the same respect and acknowledgement that he showed Naruto, and perhaps, well, why not? Eventually, love. She desired to be his, and he desired to be hers. That was her future aspiration. Her brain, however, whirled wildly against her heart as it opened up, ready to say that or something similar anyway, screaming at it that it was the last thing to say right now. Even though it sounded weird, they needed to learn from Naruto and try to say anything, as long as it was loud and extravagant, if they wanted their genuine, shared dream to come true. Her brain responded with a straightforward but firm, "Shut up," to her heart's repeated assurance that it would eventually come true because love always prevailed in the end, which appeared to resolve the issue. She was momentarily unable to speak due to the vertigo this sudden altercation had caused. Then she could hear her own voice. My dream for the future is to become the greatest kunoichi ever. Her only defense against clasping her own hands over her mouth was to stiffen as if she had just witnessed death as she blurted out the words. What was it she said? She was forced to turn to the left, toward the dark-haired boy seated close by an odd, alien force. When Sakura saw that his expression was one of mild surprise and curiosity rather than disdain or contempt, her eyes grew wide like discs. Her smug brain reasoned that it was only because of her hesitating, even panicked, expression that it didn't last long before coldness and scorn returned to those lovely dark orbs. For the remainder of the meeting, Sasuke avoided giving her a single glance and turned away once more. The news of the upcoming survival training and its failure rate were the only things that managed to momentarily jolt Haruno Sakura out of her reverie as the next hour flew by. Before departing with the others, she didn't even yell at Naruto when the fool fawned over her. She read the paper her sensei had given her and barely understood it as she walked home, her mind fixed unwaveringly on Sasuke's expression at her made-up dream. Maybe she should give it a shot and become the best kunoichi ever. It would be worth it just to see Sasuke-kun like that. Haruno Sakura dozed off that night with a silly smile on her face, and her recurrent dreams included visions of a dark-haired boy and a legendary ninja career. The following day, reality would rap loudly on her door. Okay, said Hitaki Kakashi, his hands tightly clutching Naruto's head and wrist. With his own kunai aimed at the nape of his neck, the blonde ninja clenched his teeth in a fierce stance. He would definitely get a bell and kick this jerk in the ass. As if sensing his folly, the Kyuubi hissed to his host, Naruto, get ready to hide. What? In his mind, the genin objected, but I'd like to battle him. Pay attention to me, soon enough, you will battle him. Let's get going, the Junin said, unfazed by Naruto's internal conflict. Why not right now? The blonde made another obstinate attempt. I can. Please just have faith in me. The demon, beginning to grow impatient, cut him off. Stow away in the bushes. Ready? Naruto tensed eagerly as Kakashi began to release his hold on him. Come on, please, the genin begged. He began to say, what if but the Biju seemed to have had enough. You little dipshit, just fucking hide, begin. Astonished by the Kyuubi's animosity, Uzumaki Naruto prudently concluded that, at the very least, hiding would be the best course of action for the time being in order to avoid further upsetting his tenant. The blonde genin instantly leapt away and into the wooded area when the hold on his head and arm disappeared. He saw his two teammates idly mirroring his actions. "Thank you, Naruto-kun," the demon fox said in a deep, sarcastic voice, mockingly sweet. "Now I feel better." Kakashi spoke up from the middle of the training ground just as the blonde genin was about to respond, perhaps in the most scathing way possible. As he said, "The most important thing for a shinobi is to be able to hide yourself." Naruto could almost feel the smugness emanating from the Biju. "Explain it to me," the Kyuubi said sourly. Lacking the ability to aim it at his inner prisoner, the blonde genin instead glared at Kakashi. "You should be aware that I can conceal myself," he shot back. "That's all, I simply didn't see the reason now." Improving your sensei is the main goal of this whole situation. He would therefore naturally want to witness you doing at least the fundamentals of what a shinobi is supposed to do, such as hiding. That is the main focus of this test. Naruto gave an owlish blink. How about hiding? If he could have, the demon fox would have grimaced. "No, Naruto. I was referring to the fundamentals of a shinobi," he replied tersely. The blonde remarked, as though that finally made sense. "However, I mistook this for stealing a bell from him." The Kyuubi remarked, "He's a Junin, and you saw a bit of what he can do when he made a fool of you earlier. Nobody would think he could give a bell to a mere genin. Believe me, I have faced my share of Junin in my day, and you will never be successful." "So," Naruto hesitantly attempted, "all I have to do is try to impress him?" "Yes, but probably in a peculiar way that I haven't yet discovered." "But if I just hide, how can I accomplish it?" The Biju gave an eye roll. "You don't just hide, of course. You will attempt to get a bell." "Fantastic." Naruto applauded and turned to confront his sensei. "Then, I'm leaving." "Hold on." Before he could reveal himself, the Kyuubi called. "At the very least, send a clone before going yourself. Instead of just jumping against someone you don't know anything about, consider it as researching their skills beforehand. That is precisely what Kakashi will find impressive." After a brief pause, the blonde genin nodded. "That makes sense," he said, as though it were unexpected, which greatly irritated the demon. Then he executed the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and saw his clone come determinedly into the clearing. "Come here and fight me." The fight, if it could be called that, ended up being brief and strange. After a reading Kakashi successfully defended against every attack from the shadow clones. It concluded with the secret technique 1,000 years of pain. However, the Junin seemed taken aback when the Naruto copy was destroyed. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, the technique that creates not just an illusion like a normal Bunshin, but a real, corporeal body, the silver-haired man thought out loud as he turned around. Before reopening his book, he glanced around the bushes and said, "Sent to gauge my skills and take a look at just what you're gonna deal with. I admit I didn't expect that." Although he didn't sound particularly impressed, Naruto's spirits were raised by the indirect compliment. 5 more shadow clones appeared a second later and ran toward the clearing and the ninja who were standing in the center of it. The Kyuubi remarked, "I don't think that will be of any use, Naruto. You can't just go straight after him and hope for the best." At that, the blonde genin smiled a little. However, he noted, "I have a plan for it. Perhaps it was best that the first clone didn't have time to use the lightning materia. I'm interested to see how he handles it now." The Biju stated bluntly, probably with as much nonchalance as he did against your taijutsu, though he was curious as to what the Jinchuriki had in mind. "Materia isn't the answer to every issue or conflict, as I've already stated. At least not until you have another argument to support it." Naruto, who had heard the argument enough times, simply grunted at that. "In any case, I believe it will impress him. However, it's unfortunate that Tenten has the ice materia for measurements." Kakashi said, raising his head from his book, 5 now, But no matter how many you line up, you're just Naruto. You can't beat me with that jutsu." As the Kage Bunshin launched their attack, the blonde genin watched with great interest. As he continued to read his Icha Paradise and hardly moved from his position, Kakashi effortlessly parried or dodged every punch and kick the clones threw at him, even though there were more opponents than the last time. 3 Narutos came up with a nice impromptu strategy that briefly appeared to put one of them in a good position to receive a bell, but the silver-haired man simply paused his reading and ducked the looking hand. That continued for a few more minutes before all but one clone suddenly charged at the Junin, trapping him in their midst. They were only intended to serve as a distraction, and even then, they failed to land a single blow against the incredibly powerful opponent. The lone Kage Bunshin, who remained behind while his allies attacked, swiftly withdrew the lightning materia and held it above his head as Naruto eagerly leaned forward from his concealed position. He yelled, "Take this, over the din, just as the green light was flashing all around him. "This is it," Naruto exclaimed to the Kyuubi, flashing a wild smile. "I got him." And it certainly appeared to be, until the man in the mask failed to see anything beyond the orange mass that encircled him. Then, as he heard the thunder rumbling overhead and saw the eerie fluorescence rising from the ground, his only visible eye widened. When the lightning bolt struck the ground a moment later, Kakashi was no longer present. From his vantage point in the bushes, the original Naruto could clearly see the man magically materialize a few feet away from the clones, who were left blinking at the fully charred log in the middle of them and at each other in confusion. "Kawarimi," he said to the demon fox, sounding strangely pleased by it, as though he didn't already know. Surprisingly, the Junin decided it was time for a nice demonstration, but the Cage Bunshin had not yet realized what was going on. Perhaps because he considered him the biggest threat or because he was alone, he targeted the clone with the materia first. In any case, he punched it away with a quick blow and hurried on to the others. It was useless, but he had gotten rid of another one before the others could respond. After a second, he was alone in the clearing, with only the faint smoke hints that there had been some Cage Bunshin nearby. "Wow." Naruto exhaled, unable to control his emotions. Even the moment Kakashi saved his book was hidden from him, he moved so quickly. That, the individual began while lightly dusting his clothes, was impressive. A good show of teamwork between clones coupled with a lightning jutsu. C rank from the looks of it. But still. I only had to use a Kawarimi to get away. You have to do better than that if you want to pass. At those words, Naruto couldn't help but smile broadly. He had to use all of his self-control not to get up and boast out loud. And again, I'm proved right. The Kyuubi's haughtiness in his voice essentially erased the smile from his face, but his positive attitude persisted. That was useless, as I mentioned. The blonde genin gave a slight shrug. 100 Cage Bunshin. What if I sent them? The Biju gave a headshake. That would also be pointless. Though not by much, Kakashi would likely need to take the battle more seriously. He made a valid point. Regardless of the number of you present, you are still the only one. With a noncommittal murmur, Naruto said, So, what would you suggest? After a brief period of silence, the demon concealed his surprise at being so publicly asked for his opinion. "Well, what Kakashi said just now got me to thinking," he clarified. "In fact, he commended your clone's cooperation. Why don't you join forces with Sakura and Sasuke?" The blonde scowled. "You meant only with Sakura? If I had to pick, I would have meant only with Sasuke. Of the two, Sakura is the most useless. Definitely." "She's not," Naruto began to object, but the Kyuubi cut him off, causing him to stammer. "However, I meant with her and Sasuke at this point, together. I will never collaborate with the Teme." The genin declined. "In addition, there are just 2 bells. I don't want to return to the academy, and I'd risk not having one." "And I believe the trick lies here," the Kyuubi yelled angrily. "The 2 bells. This test is designed to pit you 3 against one another, creating a competitive environment. However, Kakashi cannot assume that any genin will be able to receive a bell. That isn't feasible. Do you believe that he wants us to work together even though we know that one of us will fail?" Naruto asked thoughtfully. "Or perhaps he wants you to comprehend the purpose of this test and behave appropriately. Consider it," the Kyuubi advised him. "He says you can't defeat him by yourself and commends your clones for their teamwork. He essentially gave you instructions." Slowly, the blonde began to nod. "I believe you're correct," he said, appearing convinced, then scowled. "Nevertheless, collaborating with the Teme." "Shut up, Dobi," the Biju said jokingly, causing the Jinchuriki to growl low. "Then begin looking for your teammates. It is not the entire day." I know, Naruto said, carefully getting up from his position. "But first, a brief hand." "See you later." A dozen Cage Bunshin emerged behind him, all safely concealed. "Just to keep Kakashi busy," he clarified. With a small but firm voice, he called to one clone, "You," before approaching him and hiding beneath a tree branch. "You're the boss." The clone in question simply pointed uncertainly at himself before beaming broadly. "With hope," he said. "Really? I mean, boss as in boss?" "Yeah." The original gave a serious nod. He brought a finger to his temple and said, "Just like in our boss spars. You take my place, and you all try to take advantage of it, okay?" He gave his Cage Bunshin a serious expression. "Get it?" Naruto reported his orders, and the Kyuubi listened, a little impressed by the plan. "Astonishingly intelligent," he said, "but it won't be sufficient. As the cage Bunshin leapt away and headed in Kakashi's direction, the blonde genin simply shrugged. I understand, but why not give it a shot? Now, on to find my teammates and see if the Teme agrees with us on teamwork, he said quietly before frowning as he turned to face the woods behind him and began to walk. He'd better. Sasuke observed Kakashi waiting for his students to approach him with patience. Nevertheless, the boy with the dark hair knew better than to emerge from his hiding spot. He would attack until he received a bell or, more likely, a good beating if he knew the dobi at all. Thus, he remained hidden, and a minute later, the anticipated fresh group of clones leapt in front of Kakashi. This time, there were 12, and Sasuke pondered how many the fool could conjure. It took him a moment to realize that something was off. A Bunshin member. He appeared to be Naruto, the real one, which was odd. He thought about the news as he observed how other clones moved in front of him in a likely unintentional display of defense. Perhaps the dobi had a plan that needed him, and based on his big smile, he was quite sure of it. Of course, Kakashi had also noticed it. From what Sasuke could see, the man was a skilled and powerful Junin. It had been fascinating to watch him battle from his hiding place, almost educational, if he may use that term. Scratch that, Naruto hadn't been all that horrible either. He had appeared surprisingly attractive. During his pursuit the previous day, Sasuke had already seen the potential utility of his so-called shadow clones, but now it appeared that they were even more so. The dobi might have had a chance to win a bell if his taijutsu had been stronger, but as it stands, he could only hope to win if he managed to pull off another major surprise. Speaking of surprises, let's say, his peculiar form of ninjutsu. It looked so strong, damn it. A bolt of lightning from above. It was unlike any Sasuke had ever heard of. Kakashi had described it as a C rank, similar to his grand fireball. According to the log that had taken his place, the Junin had made a smart choice by avoiding it with a kawarimi. It had been nearly crushed to dust. Following some trash talking on both sides, Genin and Junin eventually resumed their altercation. It quickly became evident that the dobi was unable to even hit a hit with 12 of them. Naturally, Kakashi was also unable to read his book, but he appeared far too at ease for a man who was outnumbered. And now there appeared to be another certainty. In addition to participating in the attack, the original Naruto was also doing a poor job of disguising it. When the blonde went out and began directing everyone, the dark-haired boy shook his head a little, but he assumed there was no longer any need to conceal it. Like Sasuke, Kakashi had known the truth for a long time. He was closely watching his fellow genin when he heard a slight sound and turned around with a kunai in hand. To his surprise, he saw another Naruto staring at him and signaling him to keep quiet with a finger in front of his mouth. When the blonde motioned for him to follow him farther into the woods, Sasuke furrowed his brow, but after taking one final look at the battle behind his back, he oddly obeyed. Eventually, the blonde guided him to a nearby clearing where Sakura was reportedly waiting for them, out of Kakashi's line of sight. As soon as she saw him, she called out, Sasuke-kun, but he didn't respond. Instead, he questioned the dobi, how did you find me? I just looked for the best hiding spots and found you in the third I checked, Naruto stated simply. It wasn't like you intended to hide yourself from me and Sakura-chan as well, right? With a curt nod, Sasuke narrowed his eyes. Are you a clone? The blonde gave him a quick smile. He said slyly, you fell for it too, huh? I'm the original. The one fighting Kakashi is a clone pretending to be me. Hopefully, the others will take advantage of that should Sensei go out of his way for him. The Uchiha frowned, but he was impressed inwardly, but he wasn't going to say it. I doubt that will get you a bell. Yeah, me too, Naruto said, somewhat unexpectedly. I mostly need them to buy us time. Sasuke gave the other a suspicious glance. Us? The blonde gave a nod. Yeah, we three have to team up. The boy with the dark hair suddenly yelled, why should I do that? You would only get in my way. Naruto yelled back, shut up, Teme. After noticing Sakura's dejected expression. You can't do it alone. Hell, we three probably can't do that, either. Then how can you expect me to cooperate with you? Because it's the whole point of this test. At last, Sasuke became interested in that. His brow was furrowed as he gazed at the dobi. What do you mean? It's true, Sasuke-kun, Sakura shyly interrupted. I didn't believe it either when he first told me, but it makes sense. The Uchiha glanced at her for a moment before turning back to Naruto. How so? The dark-haired boy found himself giving it careful thought as the blonde gave his explanation. He had to concede that the dobi's theory made sense, keeping in mind what Kakashi had said both before and during the fight. After Naruto finished, Sakura added, "Now that I think about it, passing just 2 genin out of 3 seems really weird. At the academy, we studied all those things about the famous 3-man teams of Konoha, like the Sannin for example." In response to the blonde's perplexed look, the girl said, "They were the team trained by the Sandaime and they all became legendary ninja." Sakura glanced at Sasuke and blushed slightly. Tsunade Sama, reputed to be the greatest kunoichi in history, was part of that team. "Wow, I didn't know that," Naruto uttered in confusion. "Oji-san surely must be an incredible teacher." Raising an eyebrow at the dobi, Sasuke turned to face the girl as she continued to explain. "Besides that, Ino.Pig often mentions her father's 3-man team and how it is one of the best in Konoha." She sighed. But no one reacted, so she went on. "She says their sensei is a pervert, though. Considering this, it would be strange to leave us a member less by sending only one of us back to the academy. Plus, what if, by chance, none of us deserved that? What if we all were ready to become genin even by Kakashi's standards?" The young lady nodded. "This too. Bell test would practically force him to ignore that and fail one anyway. He set us up to fight amongst ourselves," Sasuke nodded, "and he wants us to see the trick underneath that." They exchanged glances and grinned. Together, the three of them shared a moment of complicity that Sasuke had never encountered before. He was unsure of how to react to it. But after a moment, when Naruto spoke up, he stopped smiling. "We a team, then?" Sakura looked at Sasuke with hope as she nodded enthusiastically. The boy with the dark hair hesitated, then nodded, too. The blonde then grinned broadly and said, "Well, this is perfect because Kakashi just dispelled the last clone and is coming for us." Sakura inquired, a little startled, "How do you know that?" "He told the fake me before punching him," Naruto clarified. Sasuke demanded, "And how do you know that?" "Oh," Naruto uttered after finally understanding. When Kage Bunshin die, their memories passed to me." "Ah." The Uchiha reasoned that it also explained other things. He then firmly stated, "We better hurry. After rapidly evaluating the circumstances, we must lay a trap and hide ourselves." Unexpectedly, Naruto raised his voice once more. "I think I've noticed something we can use." They soon devised a strategy to obtain the bells from their cunning sensei, and Sasuke felt hopeful about it. The trap worked surprisingly well, better than the one he had previously considered. To be honest, perhaps, he thought, the say was true. It was much better to have 3 heads than 1. For one Hitaki Kakashi, the day was becoming surprisingly fascinating. Late in the morning, he had awoken with the belief that it would likely be another day, but he was now gradually beginning to change his mind. With all of his senses focused on his surroundings, the Junin cautiously made his way into the woods. He had dropped the distracted act because the brief battles with Naruto had been engaging enough, and he was now as attentive as he would have been on a mission. The young blonde, in his opinion, deserved at least that. Naruto had been. To put it mildly, it was unexpected. He was a lot more resilient, resourceful, and clever. Scouting ahead with a shadow clone and then using a second one to pretend to be the original to lure him out and, ideally, put him at a disadvantage. It was far superior to the charge head down strategy Kakashi had initially hoped for from him. Additionally, his jutsu. When the Junin saw it coming and used lightning as a technique, he nearly had a heart attack. The Hokage had given him very little information about the alleged materia Naruto possessed, but based on the utterly strange way it had come to life, he assumed the jutsu was what it had done. According to Kakashi, the old man's description of a magical stone was accurate. The assignment of Naruto to this team was likely due as much to his materia as it was to the final Uchiha's presence. In addition to teaching them, Kakashi's responsibility was to watch over them and ensure that they remained, or better yet, developed into, stable shinobi. As stable as a shinobi could be, anyhow. The Sandaime hadn't stated this explicitly in his private conversation with him following the meeting. Sakura was most likely merely a filler on this team, but if she focused on her academically impressive mind, she could develop into a fine kunoichi. Overall, when he had been assigned to Team 7, he had thought that it could have been worse, better, and more interesting than it had been. Although he hadn't spoken to the Hokage along those lines, he had a certain thought. He would not allow Team 7 to pass. Too much trouble. He wasn't the kind. He wasn't good at handling troublesome kids, much less dealing with inept genin. Too many dull D-rank tasks. No enjoyable assassination tasks. The Uchiha. The Kyuubi. God, did Maeda Guy have to begin with Guy and his genin team at all? No, he would not allow Team 7 to pass, and still. If he hadn't been so focused, he probably would have missed him. Sakura was hiding behind a nearby tree, but he could easily sense Sasuke hiding in a cluster of bushes. He questioned whether the pink-haired girl was just following her crush around or if the two had just happened to cross paths. He moved forward as though he hadn't noticed anything, thinking it didn't really matter. At that moment, he became aware of yet another oddity. Somewhere nearby, Naruto was also present, as evidenced by the almost casual smell of his perspiration. Only one of Kakashi's narrowed eyes was visible. Did all three of his little genin happen to be hiding in the same clearing at the same time? The masked man hoped against hope, but when he finally understood the role that Sakura and Naruto were playing, a smile threatened to break through his slack mask. Oh, if this was what he believed it to be. Finally, one of the hidden genin moved and threw multiple shuriken at him as he entered the open area. It was Sasuke, who had decent aim and force. He mockingly remarked, "Such direct attacks won't work on me," but as he sidestepped the assault, he saw that one of the flying weapons had cut a piece of rope that had been neatly concealed behind him. The dozen or so knives sliced through the air and embedded themselves on a tree trunk without him even being close. Instead, he had already foreseen the boy's attack and, judging by his widening eyes, surprised him greatly by meeting him in mid-jump. "What?" he asked, laughing. "You thought I would have waited for you to come at me first." He simply pushed Sasuke 10 feet away with his palms after parrying his first, frantic blow. From his hiding place, he could almost feel Naruto's restlessness, but the boy remained motionless. They did not bulge from their position, even though Kakashi had deliberately given him and the kunoichi his back. They were clearly cooperating now, and they had a plan of some kind, albeit a painfully obvious one. Kakashi's first attack lasted the entire time it took him to identify the other traps, with his skilled and seasoned eye traveling almost by itself to the locations that any genin or chunin would have considered. The young ninja's comprehension of the trick behind his small test pleased the Junin, but teamwork and performing it well enough to win him over were two entirely different things. He could have given in to their pressure and played their game, letting himself get caught in the traps they had set up so meticulously and seeing where they led him, but what fun would that have been? When their plans failed to hold up in the face of the enemy, as frequently occurs in the real world, he wanted to see what they could do. His second lesson would be that, ignoring everything else, he gazed down at Sasuke, essentially daring Sakura and Naruto to exploit the situation. None of them accepted the challenge, most likely because they believed Sasuke would finish his portion of the plan by himself or because they believed their position was too important. Wondering how long it would take him to reconsider, Kakashi could only smile. The answer was a full minute, since Naruto had been watching Sasuke's attacks fail for that long when he finally bounded out of the bushes with a battle cry. His attempts to take a bell had all been so casually thwarted that the dark-haired boy nearly recoiled each time his scouting hand was mercilessly batted away. The Uchiha's taijutsu was so good, Kakashi had to concede. If the genin had attacked him first, he would have likely lost a bell. But it was impossible now, absolutely impossible. To be honest, he was too aware of and cautious of the members of Team 7 to let his guard down. Naruto took care of that. He had kept his Icha in his pocket for a long time, out of the reach of erratic clones and lightning strikes. To make sure it was still there, the Junin gently touched it with his fingers. The blonde began with a flying kick directed at Kakashi's sternum, huffing with a focused expression. "Need a hand, Teme?" The boy's unprotected back was in front of him as the Junin twisted sideways and allowed him to fly. With the intention of pushing the boy across the clearing, he thrust his palms out, but Sasuke's relentless defense deflected the blow and made him parry a left round kick. After saying, "Shut up, Dobi," the Uchiha turned and attempted a right kick. Kakashi had to leap backwards to dodge Naruto's blow after he ducked beneath it. In a good, forgiving mood, Kakashi pretended to be surprised and allowed the two genin to push him back a bit. He even allowed Sasuke's fingers to touch the bells at his weight, causing them to tinkle sweetly in the dark-haired boy's eyes to sparkle with anticipation. Together, they performed admirably, and encouraged by the Junin's struggles, they persisted in their attack. The only reason Kakashi delivered a hit at that point was to confirm that the opponent he was facing was, in fact, Naruto. The man had to suppress a smile when the boy didn't simply back down from his light punch but instead tried to respond in kind. He let them push him to a trap a minute later. Avoiding that resulted in another, and then another. It was only by falling to the ground and kicking the blonde with both feet that the masked ninja avoided being struck for the first time that day after becoming unbalanced and vulnerable to Naruto's attack. Naturally, that put him in an even more unfeasible situation, which was precisely what the genin had been waiting for. Sasuke inhaled deeply, then brought his hand to his mouth, rushing through seals with unanticipated speed. Kakashi was aware of what was going to happen and followed their instructions. He had shown up exactly where they wanted him to, a mere kawarimi later. He briefly caught a glimpse of Sakura's focused face as she finished her seals before he disappeared once more. While she stared open-mouthed at the empty air, the girl's genjutsu, which was intended to confuse and nauseate him, possibly long enough for her to take the bells, just hit the ground. After a long moment of staring, Sasuke looked up, left, and right in alarm. "Below you," Kakashi said softly, and his hand grabbed the genin's left ankle as it emerged from the rock beneath it. Doten. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. A second after the boy was buried neck deep, the masked man reappeared and simply leapt up to Sakura, who essentially kicked blindly at him. "Too slow, Pinky," he said, avoiding the blow with ease and raising his hands in a seal. "Megan. Narakumi no Jutsu." The pink-haired girl turned around in surprise, shrieked horribly, and fainted after a moment of silence. Perhaps he had overstated a bit. After she let out a high-pitched scream, Naruto began to slowly stand up again following Kakashi's blow. "Sakura-chan," he exclaimed. "What did you do to her?" The Junin remained silent. Rather, he rounded on the swaying blonde, easily sidestepping his frantic blow before yelling, "Konoha senpu." He assumed that this would convey the point more effectively than anything else, but it wasn't typical of him to simply yell the names of each technique he employed a moment before employing them. He simply brushed his clothes off when he was the only person still standing in the clearing, then turned to face Sasuke, or rather, his head, who was staring at him with a mixture of astonishment and rage. The words, ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu, he smiled. The three main arts of a shinobi. There are many more, but these are the basic ones. This is the third lesson of the day. With a groan from the floor, Naruto carefully rolled onto his back. After giving him a quick glance, Kakashi strolled idly over to where Sakura had fainted. It only took a whispered "Kai" to break her genjutsu and gradually awaken her. The alarm clock he had placed on the wooden stumps rang loudly from the nearby training ground. At that, the three genin looked up, and Sakura was able to get the vertigo out of her eyes. "Time's up," with a pat on his side, Kakashi said. "And the bells are still here. You fail." Sakura experienced shock on the genin's features, but for a different reason. The pink-haired girl scurried to her feet and exclaimed, "Sasuke-kun," before abruptly stopping. "Oh, genjutsu." After sitting up, Naruto glanced at her and then at Kakashi, his expression changing from one of shock to one of bewilderment. "What? We fail? But you got the point of the test, yes," the man with the silver hair said, cutting him off. After that, there was a meaningful pause as Kakashi leaned forward and smiled. "It was designed to make you fight amongst yourselves and act alone instead of as a team. But you saw the trick. You saw underneath the underneath like a ninja should always do. You worked together to get the bells, but you didn't. You only partially succeeded in the test. That's the only reason why I'll give you one more chance. But after lunch I'll make it even tougher to get the bells." With worried expressions on their faces, the genin gulped almost simultaneously, as if they were a team. However, they soon turned back to Kakashi as a glimmer of resolve began to appear in their eyes. The man in the mask chose to appear lethargic rather than smile. He wanted to see something else first, but he had been tempted to pass them immediately. "Those who can get to the stumps on their own can eat the lunch I brought," he said with a smile. Sakura looked at the dark-haired boy's head protruding from the ground and asked hesitantly, "What about Sasuke?" The Junin abruptly sounded harsh when he said, "You don't deserve it if you can't walk to the lunch. If anyone gives him food or helps him out of there, they will fail immediately and be sent to the academy. No more chances. I'm the rules, here. Got it?" He didn't even hold off until they responded. He glared dangerously, then leapt out of sight, but he remained close, watching from a concealed location to see what would happen. Sakura lowered her head in despair, and Naruto scowled slightly. Sasuke finally remarked, "I will be free in no time, anyway," as he wriggled underground and fumbled for his kunai pouch. After giving him an odd look, Naruto appeared to make up his mind. He looked around suspiciously, then smiled mischievously and approached him. "Damn, Teme, you're useless," he uttered while squatting down and brandishing a kunai. Under the glare of his fellow genin, he began to dig around himself. The boy with the dark hair yelled, "Dobi, stop it, I'll do it alone. Didn't you hear what Kakashi said?" The blonde retorted, "Well, he's not here now, is he? And stop being so stuck up, I'm trying to help you." Sakura hesitated for a moment before taking her own kunai and beginning to mimic Naruto. With an angry protest, Sasuke said, "I don't need your help." "Well, you have it anyway," said Naruto, "so shut up." For Kakashi, enough was enough. Raising as many leaves and dust as he could and wearing the most frightful expression he could think of, he leapt from his hiding places. "You guys," he snarled menacingly, then grinned abruptly, "pass." For a few seconds, the clearing was silent as Sakura and Naruto remained motionless, their kunai raised in a defensive stance, their faces wearing identical looks of shock and fear. The pink-haired kunoichi then took a deep, trembling breath, and the blonde blinked his eyes. Pass? She said haltingly. "But why? The bells. I never expected 3 genin like you to be able to get the bells from me," he said. "The test was just intended to see if you could overcome the difficulties and work together, as well as to assess your individual skills, of course." "Naruto," he said as the blonde blinked, "you acted intelligently by sending a clone in reconnaissance and worked pretty well with your clones. Sasuke, just like Naruto, you already have a pretty good offensive ninjutsu and your taijutsu is well above the level of a freshly appointed genin." Pinky, he kept going before picking up his tone. "Sakura, I can't assess your physical prowess for you didn't take part in the actual fights, but the genjutsu you tried to hit me with was much more impressive than academy level ones. I also understand that the traps around the clearing and the plan to attack me after my kawarimi were your doing, right?" With hesitation, the girl swallowed and then shook her head. "Only some of the traps were mine and the last idea was Naruto's." Startled, Kakashi looked at the blonde on his left, who merely gave a small, self-conscious shrug. "During my Kage Bunshin attacks, I noticed that all the 3 times you used kawarimi to escape, you targeted the nearest log to you," he said. "I thought that by forcing you to use the technique and by knowing where you would have ended up, we could have caught you with your pants down." The Junin clarified, "That was a repeated pattern I voluntarily showed you exactly for that." When it appeared Naruto was not understanding, he added, "To trick you into thinking you could exploit that seemingly predictable behavior of mine. A false weakness, if you like." He grinned at the rapidly recovering boy before turning back to the blonde genin. "I literally disseminated the test with such things. Sasuke even tried to take advantage of some of them during our fight, probably unconsciously judging by his surprised expression. In those instances, you just looked underneath the situation and stopped there. You didn't look underneath the underneath. It's not so easy to do that, though, not so young anyway. You'll get there with time." Naruto blurted out, "They were all tricks," not sure if he should be amazed or disappointed. The whole test was a trick. The man with silver hair scowled. "It may be tricky to get to the point of the test, but that didn't make it a trick. The important teaching remains," he said with conviction. He looked down at the boy who was partially buried underground and said, "Sasuke, have you ever been close to getting a bell during the test? Teamwork makes you better. It's as simple as that." Still attempting to break free covertly, the Uchiha halted his subtle wriggling and scowled. "Once," he said. "When was it?" "When the Dobi and I were attacking together." Naruto objected, "Hey," but Kakashi disregarded him. "That's right," concurred the Junin. "You were even able to touch them. Had you managed that before?" The boy with the dark hair simply shook his head. At that moment, Kakashi added, "That didn't happen by chance, it was yours and Naruto's skills combined that gave you that opportunity. Teamwork is the key to resolve a situation a shinobi alone can't hope to resolve. Of course, superior individual ability is important to a ninja, but it pales when compared to teamwork." He looked intently at his genin. Becoming the greatest kunoichi, becoming Hokage, even killing a certain man, they will all be easier to achieve with the help of your team. Believe me. Sasuke simply appeared thoughtful, but Naruto grinned brightly at that, almost dreamily. Instead, in the ensuing silence, Sakura appeared to consider her words carefully before speaking. Hesitantly, she said, "May I ask you a question, Sensei?" And went on when he nodded. "Why are you passing us now? Why not before, when the alarm clock rang? I mean, what was that scary behavior all about?" Kakashi merely gave her a smile. "You guys are the first to act as you did when I threatened you about not freeing Sasuke. Every other team I had been assigned just did whatever I told and I failed them. They were all just morons." After that, he leaned back, and after a brief series of hand-seals, Sasuke was raised to freedom as the ground trembled all around him. After putting his filthy kunai away and giving the Junin a wary look, the boy rolled his shoulders once and straightened his back. He attempted to dust himself off, but the dirt and mud were too thick on his skin and clothes. When Kakashi saw what was referred to as the last Uchiha both inside and outside the village, his smile widened and then deepened. Stepping back a few feet, he resumed, "Those who break the rules and codes of the ninja world are called trash, as his mind did a few years ago. But you know what? Those who don't care about their teammates are lower than trash." The man took a moment to appreciate Naruto's amazed expression before doing something he would later swear he never did but had always been tempted to do. He attempted to adopt Guy's kind demeanor, but he tried it without the grating wink, and the eerie grin, and the absurd haircut. He removed almost all of Guy from his stance. It came out cooler, of course. Finally, he said, "That ends the training. All of you pass. Starting tomorrow, Team 7 will begin its duties." Following the announcement, there was a lot of applause as Sakura and Naruto yelled their happiness and Sasuke appeared a little happier. Kakashi motioned for them to follow him as he began to leave. "Let's get back to the stumps now, and eat some lunch. Why are your stomachs all growling, anyway?" he innocently asked. The Junin smiled to himself as Naruto sputtered angrily. He was past them. A team had passed him. Hitaki Kakashi couldn't help but wonder if his choice wouldn't backfire as he watched Pinky, the Dobi, and the Teme. God, they sounded like a bad animated movie. Jot down jokes with one another. Only the original Naruto remained in the afternoon sun after the final shadow clone vanished from the wooded area with the umpteenth puff of smoke. The blonde genin was wiping the perspiration from his brow and breathing rapidly, wondering if he had ever felt so exhausted. This all against .1 exercise was an incredible training experience. It had been far more difficult than he had anticipated to fight 50 Kage Bunshin. 1 second after he had issued the command, he found that the clones had begun to attack. In an instant, Naruto was overcome by the sheer volume of Bunshin and had little comprehension other than that he was being severely abused. After that, he had yelled for them to stop right away. While nursing a bleeding lip, he said that perhaps a softer approach or a lower number was necessary. The blonde had been pushed to his limits by the rapid pace, but they had ultimately chosen the latter. The clone's duration. The fact that they only lasted until you hit them was a major disadvantage in his view. Had likely been the only thing preventing him from being beaten to death. However, the technique truly had no boundaries outside of combat. It was the most practical and helpful jutsu he had ever heard of, let alone been aware of. In this regard, the Kyuubi had also been beneficial, frequently pointing out fresh ways for him to use shadow clones to enhance his abilities or even his daily life. The Kage Bunshin proved to be lifesavers during missions. Alternatively, bore savers. Naruto didn't believe Kakashi. Sensei was referring to those when he told him they would begin their ninja duties. After becoming a shinobi, the blonde had not anticipated having to do any of those tasks, such as picking up groceries, mowing gardens, or fixing fences. However, he would now have to adjust to them because, despite his protests, Kakashi, Iruka, and the Hokage all agreed that, as a genin, and a recently appointed one at that, he could only be given these dull, kill.me.now D-rank missions. He was going to blow up sooner or later, though, if he knew himself a little. After a particularly bad mission, he told Kakashi that he could not possibly put up with this kind of thing for long. The man had only given him a spooky, creepy smile at those words and promised that things would get worse. Naruto had been puzzled by that statement. What could be worse than unclogging an elderly man's foul, smelling toilet? Nothing, of course. As was the case almost every time his silver-haired sensei opened his mouth, the doubt had been ingrained in his mind anyhow. To put it simply, the man was a walking mystery. Everything he said seemed to be open to multiple interpretations, and the most obscure interpretation was typically the correct one. Naruto, who never gave much thought to what other people said or did, found it annoying, but it was also awe-inspiring to see how far Kakashi could push himself and, more importantly, his genin towards a secret and hidden teaching. Like Sakura and, astonishingly enough, Sasuke, the Kyuubi had also been useful in these situations. Unmasking their sensei's words was one of the ways the three genin of the team had actually begun working together on tasks other than missions. They frequently asked one another what Kakashi might have meant by saying or doing certain things, and whenever one of them believed they had solved one of his riddles, they shared it with the others. It had begun almost accidentally when Sakura brought up her suspicions about Kakashi's prior order to her two teammates on the second day of work. The frequency of those occurrences increased over the following days, and they essentially developed a habit of discussing their ideas regarding their sensei's hidden meanings. To be honest, Naruto felt that they were beginning to go too far. It was one thing to see beneath the surface. It was quite another to recognize a hidden lesson concealed in each and every word or action. Kakashi couldn't possibly plan every step he took beforehand to ensure that his students' learning came from their own efforts, could he? He had to wonder, though. When they followed through on their suspicions, the man appeared to look at them differently, almost as if he was pleased or occasionally surprised. Unfortunately, unlike during the bell test, there were very few straight, unambiguous comments that confirmed their doubts were correct. Once they were his genin, they reportedly had to work hard and sweat a lot to get almost anything, including explanations and praise, which were now scarce. Naruto, however, was accustomed to that and worse. That was taken care of by the academy. Anyway, he didn't give a damn. For him, the fact that he was improving was sufficient. His taijutsu was getting better from his spars with the Kage Bunshin, and both of his materia had remarkable ninjutsu. He would also receive additional ones. As his thoughts turned to the girl who still possessed his ice materia, Naruto scowled. As agreed upon, he had returned to meet Tenten to pick up his new holster more than a week after they had first met in her hidden forge beneath the commercial district. Unfortunately, no one inside had responded to his knocks or whispers, and the secret passage had been blocked and closed. After concluding that the girl was not present, Naruto left a clone to watch the alley until she returned. However, she didn't. It had been 2 days and Tenten was still nowhere to be found. The Kyuubi was already becoming irate and irritable over it, implying that he had been duped and that he pursued the girl in order to retrieve his materia in any way. His words were ignored by Naruto. Despite his admittedly unlucky past in that regard, he wasn't so quick to distrust people and simply assumed that Tenten had been preoccupied or distracted by something else. After all, she was a ninja herself. Perhaps she had been summoned for a protracted mission or something. There may be numerous other explanations. Not yet, he was going to panic. Among many other more affectionate nicknames, the Kyuubi had called him naive, but Naruto didn't seem to mind. The blonde, his breath finally steady and calm after his exhausting workout, wiped the frown from his face and rose from his seat. With a sigh of satisfaction, he stretched his back and began gathering up the weapons that were lying around. If the holster proved too costly for his Gamma-chan, he could purchase that additional item from Tenten. When he threw his current kunai and shuriken, they were so worn that they hardly adhered to tree trunks. Oh, well, they were initially inexpensive ones. He was just scanning his surroundings to see if he had missed anything when he sensed a faint, weak pull toward the north. One more criterion. For the first few seconds, he remained motionless, wondering why he had suddenly sensed it. Only a few feet separated him from the clearing he had once used as a battlefield. Perhaps he had been too preoccupied to notice, he reasoned, but that, too, seemed highly odd. The fact that the materia's presence had emerged abruptly rather than gradually was. He exclaimed, "What the hell?" with disbelief. The materia was no longer there. It had simply disappeared from his senses as abruptly as it had appeared, as though it had never existed. How in the hell did it signify? "Hey Fox," he said tentatively, "did you sense it?" "Well, you felt it at last, didn't you?" the Kyuubi responded. "Well, I believe so." Naruto scowled in perplexity. Did it simply vanish? Like that? Yes. All week long, it has been appearing for a minute or so before returning to its original location. At that, the blonde gave a vague sound. After a flash of realization, he remarked, "So this is why you insisted I trained around here, in the outskirts near the northern gate. You intended me to be close enough to feel it." "Yeah," the demon said cynically, "and it only took you a week to do it." He spoke in an irritated tone, which Naruto chose to ignore. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" "I won't tell you about any other I sense in the future, for the same reason why I didn't tell you about the materia at the Hokage Tower," the Ebisu stated solemnly. "It is a task that you must complete independently. I'm not reliable for that." Quizzically, Naruto blinked his eyes. "Why not? You're not really going anywhere." The Kyuubi gave a menacing growl. "I appreciate you reminding me. Yes, I won't be leaving you anytime soon. However, we are unable to say the same about your Kage Bunshin, are we?" "Yes, exactly," finally understanding, Naruto yelled inside his head. "You don't get cloned, so my clones don't receive your obnoxious remarks every single day." The annoying part was ignored by the demon. Exactly. Because he is not skilled at sensing it, a Kage Bunshin would not even notice if he happened to stumble upon a materia while you were sending him around. "All right, I understand." The young genin gave a serious nod. "So, I suppose it's significant. I could even teach myself about it," he thought aloud. Perhaps they could send clones with their own cloned materia around the village and then try to find them. It is comparable to hide and seek. It's a good idea. It should be very beneficial to increase your range of perception. The Biju's deep voice sounded eager. But let's put it off for later. It's time to locate our elusive materia now that you've finally noticed it. Yeah, but it vanished, Naruto said in an ineffective manner. I don't feel it right now. I can't either, the Kyuubi acknowledged. Let's begin by examining the general vicinity where we detected it. We could be fortunate. They were fortunate, but it took them more than 30 minutes. It abruptly returned to Naruto's senses as he was inspecting a sizable cluster of bushes in what he believed to be the general direction of the materia. A moment after his head snapped up to the north, he was already running at full speed. Before reaching the northern gate, which gazed down at him with its closed doors, he stopped sensing its presence, but he saw a small group of his Kage Bunshin gathered close by. There were 6 of them, but as he approached their small gathering, one of them exploded in smoke and gave him his memories. The other clones, who had not yet realized he was behind them, were startled when the original Naruto spoke up after blinking owlishly. I'm right here. Whoa, boss! Exclaimed a startled Bunshin, who turned and raised a hand to his chest. Are you trying to dispel us by heart attack? Naruto smiled. Maybe. So, what's up? A second clone gave a headshake. He lifted his arm and pointed to his left, saying, you should know. We just forced suicide on one of us to inform you. I got here first. The materia's right over there. The original blonde squinted as he fixed his intense gaze on Konoha's outer wall and the noticeable stone that was affixed to it. Isn't it, blue? Bunshin, the Kage, exchanged a few uncomfortable glances. An uncertain, we think so, yeah, was said by one. Naruto said, strange, as he kept his gaze fixed on the blatantly blue patch on the otherwise gray wall. We thought you could have asked the Kyuubi about it, said a second clone. Naruto gave the suggestion a nod, but before he could even begin talking to his tenant in his head, the fox interrupted. I'm not deaf, he said nonchalantly. You don't have to say it again. Sorta. The Biju resumed after a rather uncomfortable pause. In any case, I can speculate as to why the materia is blue rather than green. It most likely has something to do with its capabilities. Naturally, Naruto omitted the pointless parts of the silent conversation and began reporting what was said right away. What do you mean? Then he questioned the Kyuubi. It will most likely serve a different purpose than the two, or, better yet, the one we currently possess. The demon took offense at Naruto's apparent lack of knowledge about Tenten, but Naruto chose to ignore the jab. With all the practice his obnoxious tenant threw at him, he was becoming proficient at that sort of thing. After hearing the Biju's response, one of the clones inquired, how different? I'm not sure yet. The Kyuubi said, perhaps it's its effect, or even its inner workings. Until we try, we will not know. The original Naruto thought thoughtfully, perhaps it has something to do with why it suddenly appears and disappears from our senses, but his own clones shook their heads. One said, wrong, boss, and nodded toward the gates. I was already here when it happened. Just when the doors closed after letting in a caravan of merchants, I couldn't feel the materia anymore. Really? Yeah, said another Bunshin. The materia can only be sensed when the gate is open, and it can't be a coincidence. Or at least, we don't think so. Naruto muttered a noncommittal, and then shrugged. Anyway, who cares? Let's just get our hands on it. Following the declaration, there was silence as everyone in the room simply stared up at the materia, which was affixed to the wall. Very, very high. The original blonde said, well, with hesitation. Let's give it a try at least. In the 10 minutes that followed, numerous attempts, some more absurd than others, were made to reach the materia. In those 10 minutes, the lives of over 100 shadow clones were lost. Naruto shook his head angrily when a pyramid of Kage Bunshin collapsed, dispelling everyone. He had attempted everything he could think of, but it had only served to make the Kyuubi watching laugh. He muttered in exasperation, what can we do? And was only startled when a surprising voice spoke up behind him. The real question is another one. The startled genin turned around and simply gazed at the man leaning against a tree trunk, his eyes wide. Though he was almost entirely facing Naruto, the orange-clad boy could see that what he initially believed to be a bandana was actually a leaf head protector. He had brown hair and keen eyes. With the senbon in his mouth shifting from one corner to the other, the ninja, who appeared to be a Junin, leaned forward slightly. What exactly are you trying to do? Anxiety caused Naruto's eyes to move. He half-asked, nothing? And the other person rolled his eyes. The shinobi said, please, in a tone of boredom. At least your first attempts were somewhat subtle. I can't say the same about that circus number just now. We could see and hear the ruckus all the way from the gate. The blonde muttered, they weren't so loud, and the brown Haired ninja gave him a disbelieving look. He shot back, "Are you kidding me? My ears are still ringing for all the yells and the puffing sounds." The genin in orange scowled a little and then gave up. Okay, maybe they were a little noisy. But I would like to hear you during the fall of the human pyramid, Senbon.guy, pointedly said he. Before responding, the newcomer appeared to consider his response. He grew away from the tree and took a step toward the genin. "I don't think I would ever take part to a human pyramid, but I get your point. Still, you never answered my question," he added. "What were you trying to do?" Naruto cast an irritated glance at his feet. "I was trying to reach the top of the wall." The man said emphatically, "You weren't trying to escape the village," and Naruto muttered something. "What was that?" The boy repeated, "I said," raising his voice, "that would have been far easier." The Junin gave a head nod. When the genin simply nodded, the man narrowed his eyes and said, "Considering how many clones you used, you could have climbed to and over the top easily enough. Instead, you were trying to create a somewhat stable position somewhere beneath it, am I right? Why?" Defiantly, Naruto lifted his chin and gave the shinobi a small scowl. "There's something mine stuck on the wall, and I want it." The boy's words and his act of defiance caused the Junin to simply raise an eyebrow. He rolled his senbon to the opposite corner of his mouth. "That's impossible," he finally said, looking down at the genin. "An Enbu team checks it regularly. It actually did that just a couple of minutes before you started throwing shadow clones all over the place. Whatever you lost, it's not stuck on the wall." Naruto frowned. He said angrily, "Enbu can't see it," then hesitantly changed it to, "from down here." The man gave a small snort. "There's no down here, boy. They checked the wall thoroughly while on it." The orange-clad ninja was perplexed now. He said, "While on it? What do you mean?" And the Junin gave him a doubtful look. He rolled his eyes as he walked over to a nearby trunk and climbed it up to demonstrate what he was talking about to the now shocked genin. "When I saw you earlier, I thought you just couldn't do the tree climbing exercise. But I see you don't even know about it. Really? What does the academy teach these days?" Naruto was wide-eyed and ecstatic. He watched breathlessly as the man walked up and down the tree as though it were the most natural thing in the world, and exclaimed, "Wow, how do you do that?" At last, the brown-haired ninja leapt to the ground and confronted him. "With chakra," he said plainly before glancing toward the gate. Before he spoke again, he shifted the senbon in his mouth to the left and right. "I better go back to the post now. They pay me to guard it, after all. But I can teach you if you come with me." The blonde asked abruptly, his blue eyes widening, "Really? Would you do that?" The man shrugged, then muttered something under his breath, "Why not? It's not like I'm overburdened by work anyway." He turned around and left the woods in a composed manner. Naruto eagerly followed him, practically jumping about like a contented puppy. When they reached the gate, a second shinobi stood by the side of the large, now closed doors and gave them a curious look. The man gave Naruto a feeble hello, then let out a single cough. Perhaps it was the dark bags beneath his sunken eyes that made him appear extremely pale. He gave the boy a weak smile before turning back to his fellow guard. "So, what was he up to, Genma-san?" Naruto assumed the brown-haired ninja was Genma, and he shrugged his shoulders. "He says there's something he wants stuck on the wall. I took pity of him and his pathetic attempts at reaching it and decided to teach him the tree climbing exercise." The genin sputtered indignantly, and the other man laughed lightly. "Very nice of you. But I'm hopeless with kids," Genma said, "so you're going to lend me a hand, Hayate." Hayate turned to the blonde genin after coughing twice. "I guess it's very nice of me too, then. I'm Gecko Hayate, pleased to meet you." This opportunity was not lost on the orange-clad ninja. He yelled, "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, the future Hokage of Konoha," smiling and pointing with his right thumb. "Believe it." Although Genma didn't actually roll his eyes, the boy gave him a slight frown for his doubtful demeanor. He said nonchalantly, "I'll believe it when I see it. You'll see that soon, Senbon.guy." Hayate simply raised his eyebrows as the man sighed. He gave a single cough. "Senbon.guy." The brown-haired shinobi clarified, rolling his eyes this time, "I think he has a thing for lame nicknames. I'm surprised he still didn't call you Sicko.san or something." As if to emphasize his point, the sickly-looking ninja coughed once more, and Naruto gave a contemplative nod. Saying, "That's a good one." "Now," Genma said again, clearly wanting the conversation to shift. "Let's start the lesson. First thing first, why do you want to learn the tree climbing exercise?" As if it were clear, the blonde genin asked, in order to walk up that wall and get what's mine. Ignoring Naruto's frown, the brown-haired Junin corrected, wrong, there's nothing stuck there, I already told you. And even if there was something, that would only be the short-term benefit of tree climbing. If you consider long-term gains, instead, the exercise offers you invaluable help. Traveling, for example, makes mastering the exercise pretty much a necessity for a shinobi. You will rarely travel at ground level when on a mission outside Konoha. You will instead stick to the branches of the trees or even on rooftops when in other towns. Genma double checked that the genin was following. Then there's your stamina. By using the chakra needed to practice the exercise, your reserves will slowly but steadily increase. Now, judging by how many clones you were spamming before, I guess you have lots already, but it's never enough, isn't it? Yeah, exclaimed Naruto. I'll be even more awesome. Ignoring the boy's interruption, the brown-haired ninja continued, but ultimately, you want to learn it for chakra control. Chakra control? Yes, Hayate added, grinning a little. There's a reason why it is an exercise. Exactly, said Genma. Practicing tree climbing is one of the most effective basic training methods to get better in controlling your chakra. The young genin inquired inquisitively, why? The sickly-looking man grinned down at him and explained, because it consists in gathering the exact amount of energy to one's feet, which are said to be the less sensitive body parts when it comes to chakra. That means it may be difficult. Are you up to it? The blonde appeared insulted. You bet I am. Then stop wasting time, the shinobi with the brown hair said, giving a single hand clap. Get to it. Uzumaki Naruto ran toward the wall and leapt on it while wearing a fierce expression, but he fell back on his head a moment later. Hayate said, Genma, as Naruto clutched his neck in agony. Maybe you should have made him try a seal to better call up the chakra? Dispassionately, the ninja gazed at the boy rolling wildly on the ground. Right. A deep voice reverberated inside Uzumaki Naruto's head when he woke up 2 nights later. Someone is in the room. When the words finally sank in, the blonde nearly leapt from the bed after blinking his eyes twice. The clone was standing warily a few feet away from him when he looked around in alarm. The cage bunshin shifted his gaze to the kunai in Naruto's hands and said, Calm down, boss, in a soothing tone. He had pulled it out without the genin even noticing. He opened his mouth to say, Wah, but had to stop to swallow the lump in his throat. Oh no, he was a little sleepy. That was not a pleasant way to wake up. He noticed that it was still pitch black outside when he looked out the window. What time is it? What's happening? Well, the replica of Shadow began tentatively. It's probably 3 in the morning. Maybe later. We tried to wake you up by dispelling 2 of us, but apparently their memories weren't enough. Naruto yawned wearily and gave a hazy nod. He stretched his spine languidly and put the kunai away, asking in a barely audible growl, what happened? Aren't those memories coming to you? Before lowering his arms once more, the blonde halted abruptly, nearly freezing in his awkward position. No, he replied, bewildered. That's strange. Maybe that doesn't work when you're asleep, the clone said in a low voice. Another bunshin should have dispelled himself just about now. I actually thought you had woken up that suddenly for that reason, but I guess it was probably my fault, he sighed. Was I really that noisy? No, well, I don't think so, murmured the original Naruto. It was the Kyuubi who woke me up. He told me someone was in the room. In relation to that, how did you find out? Before responding, the demon snorted. I heard him. He was that noisy, really. How did you hear him, though? With a hand raised to prevent the clone in front of him from speaking, the young genin persisted. Do you recall what we discussed with the Hokage? The one where I'm inside you and I'm aware of the outside world? I said, if you remember, I can see what you see and hear what you hear. The Biju snorted once more before continuing. I can always listen to our surroundings, even when you're sleeping. Of course, when your eyes are closed, all I see is blackness. If that hadn't been the case, I would have known the intruder was your clone and I wouldn't have warned you at that point. No, you don't actually close your ears. After hearing the explanation, Naruto nodded his head, but his expression remained inquisitive. How about while you're sleeping? The response came after a lengthy silence. Since I was confined here, I have never slept. Oh, why not? With a somewhat muted tone, the Kyuubi uttered, I don't know, I just can't. One of the things I miss the most is that. The blonde waited patiently for the silent conversation to end, lowering his arm and concentrating on the cage bunshin because he was at a loss for words. So, inquired Bunshin with curiosity. Naruto gave a shrug. He says he heard you. Okay, the other said, sounding as though they had higher expectations. He also shrugged his shoulders and then smiled with excitement. Anyway, we got it down. What? We got it down. The Bunshin said with some vigor. The tree. Climbing exercise. We got it down. Naruto's brow furrowed and he was about to speak when he closed his mouth. Why are you talking normally, then? This is something you should shout and cheer about. The whole neighborhood should wake up with a start for your yells. As though he hadn't even considered that, the clone cocked his head to the side. He gave a loud whoop of delight a moment after that. Hell yeah. We got it down. Yeah. The original blonde, now completely awake and smiling, yelled back. He gave his own copy a high five after pumping his fist in the air. Now, that's better. Nice. The Cage Bunshin gave a small laugh. Yeah, we thought you would have liked to know it immediately. Maybe even tried to take the materia right away. Naruto thought for a moment before nodding. But first, let me change, he said, throwing away his pajama bottoms. 5 minutes after finishing his dressing, he leapt after his leaving clone. Out of habit, they kept safely to the night's shadows as they ran through the village's desert streets and the shadowy woods before the northern gate. By the time they reached the gate, another dozen or so Narutos were running up and down Konoha's outer wall while the guards at the 2 doors stood nearby, looking on with mild amusement. Boss! Exclaimed one of the clones upon seeing him, we did it. At last, the orange-clad ninja came to a halt in front of them. I can see that. Another clone jumped down and exclaimed, it's amazing, with a faint grimace. A little tiring after a while, though. At that, Naruto smiled with excitement. I really can't wait to try it. Come on, guys, pop out of my way. I need your memories. A moment of perplexed silence fell. Naruto shook his head when one especially perplexed Cage Bunshin finally asked, didn't you get 3 sets already? Nope. I was asleep when those clones dispelled and have no recollection of your night whatsoever. Everyone said, oh, in disappointment. However, all of the Bunshin turned to smile pleasantly at the 2 ninja in the vicinity before vanishing with white puffs of smoke. With the Sicko.san and Senbon.guy. They were shouting. They thanked each one of them sincerely and profusely, even though some of them didn't seem particularly courteous. As the new knowledge poured into his mind, Naruto smiled broadly. He overheard Genma whispering, bunch of brats, underneath his breath. Innocently, the blonde genin asked him, did they behave? Pretty much like you would have, I suspect, came out as the dreary, straightforward response. You got their memories this time around, right? Yep. I don't know why it didn't happen while I was sleeping. Hayate logically proposed, maybe you just treated those memories like dreams and forgot about them when you woke up. It's possible, acknowledged Genma. I don't know all that much about the Cage Bunshin no jutsu. Naruto turned to face the outer wall of Konoha and exclaimed, bah, who cares? I didn't come here in the middle of the night to talk about that, eagerly. Give it a try, then. Climbing trees, or more accurately, walls, was even simpler than his clone's recollections indicated. For a few minutes, the young blonde ran up and down the smooth, vertical surface without any trouble, using the required chakra as though he had done it all his life. By varying the amount of energy used, he even tried some long jumps and slides and discovered that he was proficient at them as well. It was enjoyable, and he couldn't help but smile broadly at the guards at the 2 gates as he leapt back to the ground. You're pretty good, Naruto, said Hayate, coughing. Yeah, said Genma. It's surprising. From the first few tries yesterday, I thought it would have taken you a week, maybe 2, to really learn the exercise. But I guess that using several Cage Bunshin to train cut down that time significantly. Yeah, I'm awesome. The young genin exclaimed with a fist pump. Now I can finally take the materia. The what? Naruto clarified. The thing I was talking about, you know, the one stuck on the wall. With his forehead furrowed, Genma questioned, and what would that be exactly? You'll see, was the enigmatic response. The blonde ninja then ran to the right and up the wall. The brown-haired shinobi sighed wearily after the 2 shinobi left on the ground exchanged a suspicious glance. I'll go after him. After a few seconds, Genma quickly caught up to Naruto and skillfully flanked him to follow the boy's path. The genin had tried his pyramid of Cage Bunshin the day before, and they stopped a few feet from the top of the wall, roughly across the dense bushes. The blonde exclaimed, here it is, as he gazed down at the section of wall in front of his feet. In fact, Genma knelt to examine it more closely. What are you talking about? After giving him a quick glance, Naruto rolled his eyes. Right. You can't see it. I can't see what? The boy exclaimed. The materia, as he took a kunai from his holster and pointed at a circular fissure in the otherwise smooth wall. It's let's say a sphere, stuck right here. Genma studied it even more closely, and he had to concede that the area the boy was now prodding with his kunai did appear a little different from the others. In contrast to the porous nature of the surrounding surface, it had a paler shade of gray and appeared less raw. Is it possible that Naruto was correct about that? The boy began chiseling at the wall a second later, and the thought instantly vanished from his mind. Fuck. The man swore, abruptly stopping Naruto's arm. A tiny fragment of rock fell to the distant earth. What the hell are you doing? The blonde objected, attempting to release his arm. Let go. I'm taking it. That's what I'm doing. Let go. No way. You're coming with me. After a few seconds, the two were once more on the ground, facing Hayate. After releasing Naruto from his hold, Genma scowled at him. Meanwhile, the genin, sputtering indignantly, scowled back. A brief pause in the glowering contest was caused by Hayate's cough. What happened? Genma said sardonically. He tried to kill himself and my ninja career with a kunai, as the senbon in his mouth kept rolling from one corner to the other. What? I didn't. The brown-haired ninja rounded on the irate genin and said, yes, you did. Do you know how dangerous the wall is? There are seals carved on the other side that could literally blast most summon to pieces, and you just tried to dig down till them to find out what they do to a human body. Not to talk about what that could have done to the wards they enable, which are the main protection of the village. At that, the Kyuubi's deep voice came in. That would account for the peculiar way the materia appeared and vanished from our perceptions, he thought. At least when the doors are closed, the wall's seals must conceal its existence in some way. It most likely has something to do with the chakra circuit theorem proposed by Master Takagawa. Naruto scowled at Genma and the Kyuubi. I don't know anything about all that, but I wasn't going to dig so deep, just a few inches. The wall looks as thick as hell to me, anyway. It is, Hayate affirmed, attempting to defuse the situation a bit now that he had a reasonably solid grasp on what had transpired. Before continuing, he shot his fellow Junin an almost begging glance. But it's also quite dangerous. You must be extremely cautious when dealing with it. I was only trying to take what's mine, the young blonde whimpered, a little placated by the shinobi's gentle tone. But as soon as his gaze returned to Genma, he became aggressive once more. And I will take that, be sure of it. A calming, and we will try to help you as much as we can, was Hayate's response. But it would be easier if you actually told us what that is. The request was met with silence as Naruto considered it for a few moments. After that, he took his materia out of his pocket. This. Genma stopped his senbon and blinked at it. The boy's sphere undoubtedly resembled the section of wall he had pointed at a few minutes earlier in terms of color and composition. Hayate cleared his throat. A rock? It's not a rock, stated the young genin in a frustrated manner. With curiosity, he inquired, then what is it? Naruto snapped his mouth shut after opening it to respond. A second later, he asked Genma suspiciously, how old are you? Sicko.san is obviously old enough, but I'm not sure about you. Confused, the brown-haired ninja questioned, old enough for what? He gestured to Hayate. And he's younger than me, anyway. The blonde did a double take and then scratched the back of his head, asking, really? Well, how old are you, then? Hayate coughed a little uneasily and then answered, 23. As the young genin furrowed his brow in focus, silence fell upon the group. He made the customary gestures of someone counting by holding up his fingers and wriggling them slightly. Then he gave a nod. He leaned slightly in the direction of the two and grinned conspiratorially. All right. You're definitely old enough to know the law, then. You're like 3 years older than Iruka, even, he said. Listen up, okay? An hour later, Naruto was awestruck by the vivid blue hue of his new materia while clutching it in his tense fingers. Together with the Anbu who had visited him after he had carved the sphere out of the Konoha wall, Genma and Hayate were observing him with interest. He was reportedly the team's seal expert on patrol that day, and after examining the stonework, he had decided that Naruto could safely chisel around it, under his watchful eye, of course. With a breath of excitement, the young genin raised his arm. He summoned chakra and steered it toward a lone bush nearby. 10 long seconds went by with no discernible impact. He was not even surrounded by the typical green light circle. Okay, Genma finally said. A bit less impressive than the bolt of lightning falling from the sky, but... Naruto yelled angrily, shut up, Senbon. Guy. Before lowering his arm and turning to face them. I'm trying to focus. The other time, though, the ninja with the brown hair added smirkingly. It was instantaneous. He enjoyed giving the brat's feathers a little ruffle. Maybe this is just a rock. Nothing else. It's not, it's blue and you can't see that. That means this is a materia. Maybe it needs more chakra, Hayate said coolly. The blonde told them in frustration, I already tried to use 10 times the amount I use for the other one. The sickly looking shinobi appeared to consider it briefly. Then it's possible that it just works differently. The fact it's blue, unlike the two you already have, could entail that. As he spoke, the Anbu stepped forward and looked very formal. His deep voice came muffled from behind his hawk mask as he asked softly, if I may. In Anbu, blue means support. When a member of the team has a stripe of such color on the shoulder, it means support is his primary task or even specialization. He stopped and then resumed. Although green indicates advanced medic abilities, and not offensive power as it would seem for your stones. Even so, you might be correct, Genma remarked reflectively. With doubt, Naruto questioned, glancing down at the sphere he was holding. Support, huh? The brown-haired ninja said, maybe. You could try to use it together with the other one. It's possible it's meant to enhance other materia's powers or something. That made the blonde genin look very happy. He hastily reached into his pocket and extracted the other stone, which was exactly like the three Junin's eyes. Green light instantly rose in a circle around him as he raised both of his arms above his head. The ground was scorched, as is customary when lightning strikes dry ground. Naruto remarked, it looked pretty much the same to me, with disappointment. Genma dared to say, you could try different things as well, grinning once more. I don't know, like rubbing them together quickly or saying magic words all the while. The blonde gave him a mild glare for that, but after a moment he appeared thoughtful. He said softly, what if, before turning around once more and extending his hands, after he paired the two materia and forced them to touch, he suddenly realized something new that he had never considered before but that he now knew was entirely feasible. He was able to attack several targets. Excitedly, he thought, that was it. The blue materia offered that improvement. It seemed as though the ability to hit different spots vanished from his own mind when he attempted to pull it away from the green one. The three were still staring at him expectantly, but he turned to face the other ninja with a bright smile, as if to share that moment of realization. Naruto called up chakra and paired the materia together once more, his smile turning wolfish. Green light instantly arose from the earth surrounding him, and thunder rumbled ahead, much longer than usual. He was positively open. Mouthed by the subsequent lightning shower. He counted 6 bolts, but given how quickly and closely they had adhered to the ground, he might have missed one. When the noise had subsided, he verified their number by looking down at the burnt marks. 6. There were 6 lightning bolts that had dropped from the sky. Holy shit, Genma said with a tone of admiration. Naruto grinned. As he looked down at the blue sphere in his hand, he thought, holy shit, seemed really appropriate. This all materia had already captured his heart.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.